Steam was still rising from the bowl of soup when my son threw it straight into my face. The scalding liquid ran down my neck, shards of porcelain cut my lip, and he roared, "Useless! If you weren't my mother, you'd be thrown out of this house already." I stood still, wiped the blood at the corner of my mouth, and heard my daughter-in-law giggle. "You're such a real man, know how to teach the elderly the right way." For 3 years, I swallowed my tears, every insult, every slap, every dollar of my pension managed for me because I believed a mother's love could pull a son back from the edge. But that faith shattered when someone from his company called, asking about unusual transfers under my name. Right after, Andrew said coldly, "Tomorrow you'll sign everything. If not, you'll be the money launderer." That night, I dried the blood, opened the drawer, and picked up my phone. Every statement, every audio clip I'd quietly gathered for months would no longer be evidence I was afraid to hide, but the indictment I intended for the son who used to be my only pride. If you're still listening, tell me where you're watching from. Every comment you leave is another mark in this journey. And if this story has touched you, don't forget to hit like so it can reach even further. I am Margaret Hill, 68, widowed for nearly 10 years. I used to be an executive secretary at Benton and Avery LLP, where I spent over 40 years keeping every contract and every meeting on the dot. My life was tied to numbers, punctuation marks, and the belief that if I worked hard enough, life would be fair. This house, a small 2-story place in the western suburbs of Chicago, is the only reward I kept after a lifetime of work. But now, I live in it like an unnamed housekeeper. The morning after the bland soup night, I woke in the gray light leaking through the curtains. My neck burned, my lip was split, and every movement sent a stab through my left shoulder. In the mirror, my face was slightly swollen, the red streak on my neck spreading purple. I dabbed on a little cheap foundation, listening to Andrew's footsteps echo downstairs. When I came to the kitchen, Andrew was already at the table. The light flashed off his red tie, the only familiar thing left of the boy who once wore a cheap suit to his first interview. Now he didn't look at me like a son looks at his mother, but like a boss looks at a lowly employee. "Where's breakfast?" he snapped, eyes never leaving his phone. "What would you like?" I asked softly. "Scrambled eggs, toast, black coffee. Don't overcook the eggs." I stayed quiet and did as told. As I stood at the stove, soft footsteps sounded. Jasmine, Andrew's wife, in a mint silk nightgown, brown hair pulled into a neat high ponytail. Her smile was sweet and proper, the kind meant for a husband, not a mother-in-law. "Good morning, Mother Hill," she said, voice light as air. I nodded. "Morning." Her eyes landed on the bruise at my neck, then flicked to her husband as if to ask, "Too rough last night?" Andrew just curled his lip and sipped coffee. Jasmine smiled and turned back to me. "You should be more careful. The kitchen floor is very slippery." I heard the message under her words, but said nothing. I poured coffee into a cup and set it gently in front of Andrew. He didn't say thank you, only murmured low enough for me to hear, "Remember, if anyone asks, you fell. And stop making random phone calls." I lowered my head. Jasmine gave a tiny laugh, straightened his tie, and said teasingly, "You really are the man of the house. Without you, this place would be chaos." Andrew put a hand on her waist, kissed her forehead, then shot me a cold smile. When the two of them left and the engine started outside, I finally exhaled. I washed the dishes slowly, keeping my mind blank. Every time I bent over, my shoulder stabbed with pain. This kitchen, where I once baked with my husband for Thanksgiving, where I hung Andrew's Christmas cards when he was little, felt like a strange room now. I'd lived here more than 30 years, but since Andrew moved, back in. Nothing in this house belonged to me anymore. 3 years ago, when Andrew divorced, he knocked on my door in the middle of a rainy night. "Just staying for a bit, Mom," he said. "I've lost everything." I pitied him and opened my door and my wallet. I didn't know that opening my door to my son meant opening the door to my own hell. At first, things seemed fine. Andrew fixed the fence, took me grocery shopping, said sweet things like when he'd been a good boy. Then he started managing my pension. "Let me handle it," he said. "Older folks get scammed so easily." From then on, I was left $20 a week for spending. The rest Andrew invested for me. I didn't ask because I trusted my son. When Andrew married Jasmine, I already had doubts. The wedding was oddly extravagant: white flowers, a live string quartet, imported champagne far beyond Andrew's reach. When I asked, he said, "The company sponsored it, don't worry." I believed him, until I found the payment receipts drafted from an account under my name. From then on, Jasmine treated me like hired help. I cooked, washed, and cleaned. She showed sweetness only when guests were around. Otherwise, she was ice cold. "At every meal," she told her husband, "having a mother-in-law like this is as convenient as having a housekeeper for free." Andrew just laughed. I couldn't. The violence started with criticism: too salty, too bland, too cold. Then pounding the table, then slaps, shoves, pinching, hands on my throat. I once thought if I stayed quiet, he'd calm down. The quieter I was, the worse it got. That bland soup night was only the final result of 3 long years of silence. The next morning, just as I was about to make tea, the landline rang. A polite male voice said, "Hello, I'm Owen Price, an accountant at Northern Apex. I need to confirm some recent transactions from an account under the name Margaret Hill." I froze, hand shaking. "My account?" "Yes. There are repeated transfers totaling nearly $50,000 signed under your name, but the signature appears inconsistent." I glanced at Andrew's door shut tight. "We'll check." "Thank you," Owen said. "If needed, you can meet me in person on the 18th floor at Northern Apex, 1134 North Avenue. The sooner the better." When he hung up, I stood there, still holding the cup of tea grown cold. On the table was the black envelope I'd kept hidden inside were statements I'd secretly printed when Andrew wasn't looking. Now I understood. He'd used my name to launder money. The front door swung open. Andrew stepped in, voice flat. "Someone call?" "No, just an ad." I lied. He stared straight into my eyes, like he could see through me. "Tomorrow, 10 a.m. The bank, you sign for everything. Otherwise, the money laundering charge is yours." I didn't answer. In my head, his sentence kept echoing. "Otherwise, you'll be the money launderer." That night, I opened the safe, took the black envelope and my phone, and hid them in my cardigan pocket. Every document, every recording, every tiny detail I'd gathered for months now, they finally mattered. As I sat at the table, my neighbor Ruth Delgado knocked. She's a kind woman, 66, with softly curled gray hair, who often brings me baked goods on weekends. "Oh my, Margaret," she whispered, seeing my split lip. "What happened?" "I fell," I said, turning my face away. Ruth placed a hand on my shoulder and murmured, "If you need me, knock 3 times on the back door. I'll be there." After she left, I sat in silence. The house was still. Only the ticking clock and a draft slipping through the door crack. I wrote a few small lines on a piece of paper. "I'll cook tomorrow's lunch, but the bank, I'll talk to your accountant." I set the note on the table beside 6 crumpled $10 bills. Andrew, I had tossed down. Then I walked through the living room and looked at an old photo, Andrew at 8, grinning on the lawn. I touched the frame, my voice trembling. "You were once my pride, but tomorrow I won't let you destroy me any further." Outside, the night wind hissed through the dried rose canes under the eaves. I drew the curtains, turned off the light, and sat in the dark. No more fear, only one thought. Tomorrow I will push back. 3 years ago, on a cold, rainy night, a knock came while I was making tea. When I opened the door, Andrew stood there soaked, stubbled, pulling a gray suitcase. The porch light cast his face in yellow. Tired. Bitter. A little pitiful. Like when he was small. "I lost everything, Mom," he said hoarsely. "Divorce, debt. The bank took the house. Can I stay for a while?" I didn't think twice. I opened the door, pulled the suitcase in, and opened my heart too. "This is always your home," I said. The words came as naturally as breathing because no matter her age, a mother only knows how to open her arms when her child falls. The first weeks were peaceful. Andrew slept in his old room upstairs, still calling me Mom in a gentle tone. I got up early to brew coffee and toast bread. He fixed the pipes and painted the fence. In the evenings we watched the news. I listened to him talk about work and stress. He said he would start over. I believed every word. Then, one morning, while I was slicing apples, he looked around the table and said casually, "Mom, the house is kind of messy. After years alone, I guess you got used to clutter?" I forced a smile. "I keep things tidy." Andrew shrugged. "Sure, you're kind of tidy. Men like a different kind of clean." I went quiet. It was the first hint of criticism in his voice. Just a hairline crack, but I didn't know it would spread like rot under the floor. A few weeks later, Andrew suggested, "Let me help manage your finances. You still get about $1,300 a month in pension, right?" I hesitated. "That's my daily living money." "Don't worry. I'll give you spending cash about $20 a week. Enough. I just want to be sure no one takes advantage of you." Hearing "take advantage" made my throat tighten. Ironically, I was letting myself be taken advantage of and didn't know it. I agreed. The next day, Andrew brought home a new account form and told me to sign. "Sign here. Your old signature is too easy to fake. I'll register a new signature for security." I signed. One shaky stroke, and with it, I signed away my freedom. In the months after, Andrew changed. He spoke less, snapped more, and often said, "You don't understand the world now." I had to cook his favorites at exact times, exact flavors. If it was too salty, he put his chopsticks down and left the table. I ate the rest in silence. Then Jasmine appeared, a long-haired brunette with red lips and a confident gaze. Andrew introduced her on a Saturday afternoon while I was watering plants. "Mom, this is Jasmine." The best woman I've ever met. I shook her hand, felt her dark red nails, cold as ice. She smiled. "I hear you're very organized. I like women like that." Neat and orderly. Polite words, but it felt like she was inspecting a valuable antique. Their wedding came just 2 months later, at a lavish country club. Everything was so extravagant it stunned me. Live music, French wine, a jeweled silk gown, a buffet so grand I felt out of place. I whispered to Andrew, "Where did you get the money for all this?" He put a hand on my shoulder and smiled. "Don't worry, someone sponsored it." But when I got home and checked the account, the balance was cut in half. The numbers vanished coldly, without explanation. I knew but didn't dare speak. Once he had Jasmine, my questions were cut off by a stare sharp as steel. After the wedding, Jasmine moved in. I thought, another woman in the house might calm Andrew down. I was wrong. From day one, she circled the rooms, issuing orders. "The living room's a bit dark. Mother Hill, mind if I change the curtains? And the old sofa has to go. I'll get a modern one." Softly, I said, "Your father-in-law and I picked that set when we married. It's still good." She smiled. "I understand, but every generation has different taste. I'll handle it." Within 2 weeks, the home I loved became somewhere else. Cold white curtains, gray walls, an oversized dining table. Their wedding photos went up, ours disappeared. In one morning of clearing out old things, Jasmine erased 40 years of my memories. She called me Mom when guests were around. When it was just us, she switched to you in a clipped, dismissive way. "Did you mop yet?" "Change the guest room sheets, my friends are coming tomorrow. Stick to light chores, you're old." Oh, and don't forget the trash before I'm back." I listened, obeyed, and slowly forgot what it felt like to be called Margaret. Andrew was no longer the son I knew. Always in a suit, home late, talking to me only when something needed handling. One evening he handed me an envelope. "Sign here, new bank card. The old one has issues." I skimmed it, saw faint words. "Full authorization. You need that much control? Don't make this hard. I'm trying to help." His voice was calm. His eyes were a warning. I signed. From then on, I didn't know how much money I had. All bank mail went to Andrew's email. If I asked, he said, "Everything's fine. Just cook and rest." When I salted a stew a little too much, Andrew slammed the table. "Do you know how to do anything right?" Jasmine giggled, leaning on his shoulder. "Don't be mad. She's just cooking by habit." That was the first time Andrew slapped me. Quick, clean, like a reflex. I stood frozen, ladle in hand. My cheek burned, but what hurt most was that no one thought it was unusual. Jasmine just murmured, "Stop, don't leave a mark on her hand." After that, each week brought a new excuse: cold rice, dirty bowls, a damp dishcloth. Andrew started shoving me when he was angry, squeezing my shoulders, pinching my arms, slapping me if I dropped a glass. I learned to move quietly, step softly, speak less. I didn't dare meet my son's eyes. Every night after they slept, I sat at the kitchen table, opened my old computer, and secretly printed bank statements I found in an old inbox. I hid them in a black envelope inside the safe. Each page tightened my chest but also gave me a tiny bit of power. Andrew controlled my phone, too. He installed a location app, saying it was so you won't get lost. Every time I called someone, he asked, "Who's that?" Sometimes he checked my call log. Old friends stopped reaching out. I became invisible in my own life. Once, my closest friend at the firm, Marjorie, invited me to lunch. Before I could answer, Andrew snatched the phone. "You're not going anywhere. They just want your money." I went silent. Marjorie never called again. Days blurred together. Cook in the morning, laundry, mop the floors, then cook again at night. I turned into a useful shadow, no breaks, no mistakes allowed, no voice. Sometimes I opened the drawer with my old blue dress, the one my husband said made me look like spring. I touched it and remembered when Andrew was a boy running through the yard shouting, "Mom, look at me." I used to think raising a child was duty. Now I know sometimes it's a gamble with your soul. One night, I sat on the porch, looking at the light in my neighbor Ruth Delgado's window. She keeps a lamp on late, reading by the glass. I wondered if she'd hear me if I knocked. I didn't dare. Not yet. I was still too weak. Even so, a small thought formed inside me, frail but determined, like a seed pushing through dry soil. One day, I will get out. And on the bland soup night, when the hot steam ran down my neck, I knew that day had come. The next morning, I stood in the small kitchen staring at 6 crumpled $10 bills. $60, the money Andrew tossed down like charity, was my entire budget to make a perfect lunch for Jasmine's friends. I opened the fridge, half a stick of butter, 3 eggs, wilted greens, a third of a bottle of white wine. I took a breath and pushed the humiliation aside. I'd hosted firm luncheons for tougher guests. The only difference was back then I was Mrs. Hill. Now I was just the cook. I wrote a list and counted every dollar. Frozen salmon, romaine, pasta, lemons, a few slices of baguette, and a bit of cream for dessert. Total, $57. $3 left, just enough for a small bouquet to keep the table from looking bare. While I folded the last bill carefully, Andrew came in white shirt, silver gray tie, coffee in hand. He glanced over the ingredients and snorted. "Don't embarrass me. Jasmine's friends all have husbands in big positions. Make sure it suits their taste and don't talk too much." I nodded in silence. "Oh," he added, "and don't let anyone ask about that bruise. If they do, say you slipped carrying the soup." Jasmine swept in white dress, hair neatly coiled. She smiled like candy. "Mother Hill, I want everything to be truly refined. I planned this to make an impression. Andrew says you cook wonderfully. I'm sure you do. I'm sure you do sounded like a dare. I cooked all morning." Steam fogged the glass. Oil stung my neck, but I kept stirring the sauce. Butter and garlic filled the air. By 12:30 p.m., the table was set. Seared salmon, Caesar salad, pasta with lemon cream sauce, chocolate mousse, and the white wine I'd saved from my husband's birthday years ago. The bell rang. 3 women came in, perfume mixing with the scent of rain on their coats. Jasmine introduced them. "This is Becca, Lydia, and Noelle." All 3 were elegant, soft-spoken, heels tapping on the floor. Becca had the sharp gaze of someone always comparing. Lydia laughed easily, voice bright. Noelle, the quietest, wore a gentle smile but watched everything closely. They sat around the table. Jasmine poured wine and giggled. "I cooked all of this myself." "Well, with a little help from my mother-in-law." Lydia burst out laughing. "Oh my gosh, having a mother-in-law like this must be so convenient. No need to hire help." Jasmine pretended to blush. "Pretty much. She loves to cook." I pressed my lips together, gripping the dish towel as heat rose in my chest. I held it in. I'd heard enough jokes like that to last a lifetime. I carried out the salmon and said quietly, "Please enjoy." Noelle looked up. Her smile faded when she noticed the faint tear at my lip. "Are you hurt, Mrs. Hill?" Before I could answer, Jasmine cut in lightly. "She slipped last night. She's clumsy." Becca laughed. "Just like my mom. Older people can be so awkward." Their laughter circled the table, and the room seemed to shrink. Noelle kept her eyes on me, no longer carefree. "Where did you work before?" she asked. I lifted my head and said softly, 40 years at Benton and Avery LLP, before I retired." The table fell silent. Lydia set down her fork. Becca narrowed her eyes, surprised. Jasmine forced a smile. She was just a secretary, but very dedicated, probably why she types super fast. Noelle tilted her head. "Benton and Avery? I know that firm. I worked with them on a big case in 2010. She looked at me differently, like she'd recognized something. "You're Margaret Hill, aren't you? I remember seeing your name on the exec list for Hanover v. State." I froze. That case name was a ghost I'd tried to forget. I nodded, voice tight. "Yes, that's me." Noelle gave a small smile, not pity, but a quiet respect I hadn't seen in anyone's eyes for 3 years. The mood changed. Lydia switched topics, Becca sipped wine, and Jasmine kept a stiff smile, flicking anxious glances at me as if afraid I'd say more. I just cleared plates and listened to the silver on china clink, each sound slicing at my chest. Around 2 p.m., Andrew came home. The door opened and leather shoes hit the floor. "Babe," Jasmine squealed, running to him, arms around his neck like a war reunion. Andrew smiled and came to the table. Seeing me at the sink, he set a hand on my shoulder, light, but enough to freeze me. "See, ladies?" he joked. "My mother's the best chef in Chicago. If I didn't keep her here, some restaurant would have hired her." His friends laughed, thinking it was a compliment. Only I knew that squeeze wasn't affection. It was a warning. Lunch ended in polite pretense. When the guests left, Noelle lingered and said softly, "Nice to meet you, Mrs. Hill. If there's a chance, I'd love to hear more about your time at Benton and Avery." I kept my voice steady. "I'd like that." Her look told me something without words, a quiet solidarity. The door closed. The house went still. Jasmine turned to Andrew, voice sharp. "See, your mother was bragging about the past again. I told her to keep quiet." Andrew looked at me, half smiling, half annoyed. "Mom, don't bring up old stories next time. No one wants to hear them." I nodded. "I understand." Jasmine grabbed her bag and pecked his cheek. I'm off to the salon. Make sure the dishes are done, Mother Hill. She said it on her way out, light as a breeze, but I got the message. I cleared the table. One plate was broken. I picked up each shard. Steam from the sink burned my eyes. In my head, Noelle's words kept echoing. I remember seeing your name. A small touch that brought a weak heartbeat back to life. Someone still remembered who I had been. In the afternoon, I descant of that, brought leftovers to Ruth Delgado. As the door opened, she looked at me, worried. "Oh, Margaret, your lip hasn't healed yet?" "I'm fine," I said softly. "Their lunch is done." She shook her head, took the container, then, pretending to speak loudly, "Thank you. I'll wash the container and bring it back." Her voice was louder than usual, enough that if Andrew was home, he'd hear it clearly. That evening, just as I sat down on the sofa, there was a knock at the door. It was Ruth, standing there with the food container scrubbed spotless. "Thank you," I said, about to close the door. Ruth leaned in slightly, lowered her voice. "Are you okay?" The question was light as a breeze, but my heart clenched. I wanted to nod, to say I'm okay, but my throat tightened. "I'm okay," I whispered, and my eyes began to blur. Ruth looked deep into my eyes and didn't say anything else. She gently placed the container in my hands along with a small quarter-folded note. "Keep this," she said. "If you need me, knock 3 times on the back door at 7 o'clock. I held the note, feeling the warmth of her hand still lingering. After Ruth left, I opened it. The rounded, firm handwriting read, "I believe you, and I have ears to listen." I sat quietly for a long time. Outside on the porch, the evening wind carried the damp smell of soil and roses. Inside, the house was as still as always, but somewhere in that silence I heard a familiar beat, my own, a beat no longer afraid, starting to wake up. I got up at 5 a.m. Pale dawn slid through the curtains and across the wooden floor where I'd been writing all night. Next to a cold cup of tea was a thick black envelope, the thing I'd been carrying like a lucky charm. I put on my old wool coat, slipped into my worn flats, grabbed my purse, and opened the door softly as if I might wake the past. Andrew was still asleep. I heard a light snore upstairs, and Jasmine had left early to go to yoga. This was my only chance. I hurried across the yard. The morning chill pricked my skin like needles. I caught the number 24 bus toward downtown and took a window seat. The city was still misty, gray buildings sliding by, and my heart felt as heavy as if I were carrying my whole life in my coat pocket. The trip was longer than I expected. I hadn't been back to the business district where I used to work in 7 years. When the bus stopped near the Northern Apex building, I looked up at the huge glass wall reflecting the first light of day, a new headquarters, 18 floors, gleaming as if it had never held anything dirty. I took a deep breath and stepped through the revolving door. The receptionist looked at me with polite, assessing eyes. "Good morning. How can I help you?" "I have an appointment with Mr. Owen Price." "Your name, please?" "Margaret Hill." She tapped a few keys and nodded. "Yes, Mr. Price is waiting on the 18th floor, elevators to your right." In the elevator, I watched the numbers climb. From 1 to 18 steps between a mother and the truth I was about to face. When the doors opened, a salt and pepper-haired man approached. He was in his early 50s, trim, gray suit, thin glasses. "Mrs. Hill? I'm Owen Price. Thank you for coming." His voice was low, warm, and without judgment. We walked into a small conference room with glass walls. He set a thick folder in front of me. "I'll be direct," he began. "We found a pattern of suspicious transactions tied to an account in your name more than $50,000 over the past 6 months. The funds were moved out immediately after they came in, mostly to accounts in Miami and Denver. All of them bear your signature, but the handwriting doesn't match." It felt like the floor dropped out beneath me. "What are you saying?" Owen slid the papers toward me. "These are copies. As you can see, there are clear..." Inconsistencies in the signature. The person doing this is your son, Andrew Hill. I stared at the page. Every number, every comma cut like a knife. My name, Margaret Hill, repeated again and again, a name I once felt proud of, now a tool in a scam. You're saying my son used my account to launder money? Owen nodded slowly. More precisely, he used your identity to legitimize embezzled funds from the company. We've collected sufficient financial evidence. Management wants to handle it internally for now, but you need to know so you can protect yourself. If law enforcement gets involved, you'll be the first one named. I dropped the pen, my hands shaking. I don't know anything. I didn't sign, I didn't transfer. I just live in my house. I believe you, Owen said, eyes sincere. But the law won't accept words alone. I advise you to file a report immediately. That will protect you as someone exploited, not an accomplice. I sat in silence. In my head echoed my late husband's voice from long ago. Margaret, when everyone turns away, the truth is the only thing that stands with you. I swallowed and asked softly, if I sign, what happens to Andrew? He'll be formally investigated. But you can't save him by staying silent. Silence is admitting guilt in your place. I looked at him, sunlight from the glass wall reflecting in my eyes. Give me the form. Owen took out another packet and set a pen down. My hand shook, but the letters were clear. Margaret L. Hill. When I finished, I took a deep breath. You did the right thing, Owen said gently. And no matter the outcome, you're the most honorable person in this story. I stood. My legs felt unsteady, but I was lighter somehow. I wasn't just a victim anymore, I'd taken action. When I stepped out of the building, the midday light hit my face and made me squint. It had been years since the sun didn't feel cold. I caught the bus back. The ride felt endless. I thought of Andrew, the boy who once slumped on my shoulder after failing a college exam, who said, "I'll make you proud." Now he'd turned me into a shield for his sins. I didn't know if there was anything left between us to call mother and son. When I got home, the clock was striking close to 3. I had barely stepped inside when I heard Andrew from the living room. "Where did you go?" His voice was dry and low, but I recognized what sat underneath. Suspicion. "I went out for a bit," I said slowly, hanging my coat on a chair. "Out where?" "To see your accountant." The air froze. Andrew shot to his feet, his face changing color. "What?" I spoke with Owen Price. He showed me everything, the transactions, the forged signatures, the accounts in Miami. I know it all. For a few seconds he couldn't speak. Then his wide hand clamped down on my wrist, squeezing till the joints crackled. "Are you joking, Mother?" "I've never joked about justice." He squeezed harder, his breath hot on my face. "Shut up, you senile old woman. You have no idea what you're destroying." Pain shot through my arm. "Andrew, let go." He gritted his teeth, voice dropping. "Tomorrow, 10 a.m. You're going to the bank to sign everything away, understood?" I looked him straight in the eye, no fear left. "No." He shoved me. I stumbled into the table, pain shooting up my arm. "No? You think you can go against me?" "Not against you, Andrew. Against the law," I screamed. The sound burst out louder than I expected. Which detail outraged you most? The bruising wrist grab or the senile old woman accusation? You can share it quickly in the comments. I'll read every note because your words might be the lifeline for someone scared and hiding somewhere out there. Outside, I saw a figure by the fence, Ruth Delgado. She stopped, eyes wide. He let go of me and glanced toward the window. My eyes met. Ruth's for an instant, and I knew she had heard. Andrew stepped back, his face tight. He inhaled, then gave a thin smile, the kind that chilled me. "Tomorrow, 10 a.m., the bank. You will sign. If not, don't blame me." He turned and went upstairs. I dropped into a chair, hands still shaking. Purple fingerprints were already forming on my wrist. A coffee mug lay shattered on the table, liquid spreading across the floor. I saw my reflection in it, a gray-haired woman with tired eyes, but no longer weak. I heard Ruth's window slide open. A breeze drifted in, carrying a hint of cinnamon from her baking. Then a small tapping, 3 knocks, slow and sure. I lifted my head and gave a slight nod. That night, I sat by the window in the dark. Moonlight fell on the black envelope, lighting up the cold words like fate's proof. I knew the real fight would start tomorrow, but I also knew something else. This time, I wouldn't be alone. I couldn't sleep that night. The clock ticked in the dark house like the heartbeat of someone counting down to something inevitable. On the table, the black envelope lay thick and silent, but alive like a second heart in my chest. Close to midnight, a faint light flickered in the backyard and startled me. I lifted the curtain. Ruth Delgado was crouched by the rose bed. Moonlight lay across her shoulders like mist. She set something down and covered it with dry leaves. When the flashlight clicked off, I realized it was a mini camera. I cracked the door and whispered, "Ruth?" She raised a hand for silence, then murmured, "He'll blow up again, Margaret. You need proof. Don't be afraid." I nodded, heart pounding. Ruth disappeared into the dark. The scent of roses that night, earthy, with a metallic edge, stamped itself in my memory as the start of survival. The next morning, while I was rinsing glasses, Andrew came down acting different. Freshly ironed shirt, a whiff of expensive cologne. "Good morning, Mother," he said, light as if nothing had happened. I looked at him and stayed quiet. "I'm sorry about yesterday. I lost my temper. Work's stressful. You're still my mother." Before I could answer, he stepped closer, poured me coffee, set it on the table. "You should rest and stop wandering around. Lately I've noticed you're unstable. If you keep pushing about those accounts, I might have to get a doctor to evaluate your mental health. You know how it is, old age, confusion." His tone was gentle, but every word slid over my skin like ice. I understood. One word from me, and he'd label me the crazy old lady. I set the cup down and looked him straight in the eye. "What are you afraid of that you'd hire a doctor just to declare your mother insane?" His eyes darkened, then he pasted on a smile. "I'm not afraid of anything. I'm just trying to protect you." He turned away, voice still mild. "Oh, and remember, 10 a.m. today. We're going to the bank. We'll tidy up the paperwork. No need to drag this out, right?" I nodded. In my head, everything spun. If I refused, he could do anything. If I agreed, I'd lose everything. I had one hope, Ruth. Around 8:45, there was a knock at the back door. I opened it and Ruth stood there, holding a tiny memory card wrapped in foil. Her coat was damp with dew, her breathing quick. "You have to come with me, right now." I can't." "Andrew's upstairs. Listen to me, Margaret. I have video and clear audio. If you don't go today, there might not be a tomorrow." I looked at her, then up the stairs. Water ran in the bathroom. He was still getting ready. I ran to my room, opened the safe, and stuffed the black envelope, house deed, and ID into my purse. "Back door," Ruth said. We slipped through the yard, along the fence, out the narrow alley. I was shaking so badly I had to hold on to Ruth. If he finds out I left, then he'll say you're crazy and, "Next time you won't get a chance to fight back. We need to see Assistant District Attorney Kimberly Hart." I called ahead. We took a cab. The whole way, all I heard was my heartbeat. The sky was gray, misty rain tapping the glass, buildings sliding behind us like silent witnesses. Kimberly Hart's office was in a red brick building downtown. She was in her early 40s, brown hair, upright posture, quick, decisive voice. When Ruth introduced me, she just nodded and said, "Have a seat." "I'm listening." Ruth set the memory card on the desk. "She's being abused." I recorded it. Kimberly loaded the card into her computer. The screen showed a grainy but clear image. Andrew clamping my wrist, his voice harsh. "Tomorrow you'll sign everything away. If not, you know the consequences." You could hear me yell, and Ruth outside calling, "Margaret!" Everything was audible. In the small office, the sound made the air heavy. Kimberly sat still for a few seconds, then turned to me. "Do you have any other documents?" I slid the black envelope to her. "Everything's here, statements, paperwork, and the sworn statement I signed at Northern Apex." Kimberly looked through it and nodded. "You've done exactly the right thing. With this evidence, we can request an emergency arrest. Warrant charges will include elder abuse, coercion, and financial fraud." I could hardly believe it. "Really? I can get out of this?" "Not just get out, but protect your rights. But you need to sign the complaint. After that, the police will move within a few hours." Ruth squeezed my hand. "Do it. For yourself. And for all of us." I looked at the pen on the desk. One signature, but a line between silence and justice. I remembered the years of bowing my head, Andrew's eyes when he said, "You're nothing." I took a breath and picked up the pen. My signature trembled at the first letter, but by the last, my hand was steady as steel. Kimberly nodded, a thin smile on her lips. "Good. You just did the bravest thing in your life." She called the task force. "Prepare to detain Andrew Hill. Address." I heard her firm voice, each sentence nailing reality into place. While the police mobilized, Kimberly said, "You should stay away from your house for a few days. I'll arrange a safe place." I looked at Ruth. "I'm not going anywhere until I see him in cuffs." Kimberly paused, then nodded. "Fair. You have that right." We returned to my neighborhood in an unmarked car. Rain dotted the windshield, each drop a heartbeat in my chest. As we reached the lane, I saw Andrew loading bags into his car. Suit, tie, looking sharp, but his face was tense, eyes darting. A black police cruiser pulled up, lights flashing red and blue. The siren split the quiet street. 2 officers got out. One read aloud, "Andrew Hill, you're under arrest on suspicion of abuse, coercion, and financial fraud. You have the right to remain silent." He turned and froze when he saw me standing a few yards away holding a black umbrella. "Mom," his voice caught. "What are you doing?" I answered softly, oddly calm, "I'm just telling the truth." He thrashed and shouted, "I didn't do anything. She's old. She's delusional." They cuffed him, pushing his head down. I heard the cold metal close click, a small sound louder than any scream I'd ever heard. As the car took him away, I stood still, rain soaking my shoulders. Ruth came up and held the umbrella over me. "You okay, Margaret?" I looked into the fogged window where my reflection stared back, not the trembling woman from last night, but someone else, upright, clear-eyed, free. "I'm okay," I said quietly, "for the first time in years." Kimberly stepped out and squeezed my shoulder. "From here on, the law takes over, but you saved yourself before anyone else could." I lifted my face to the sky. The rain had stopped, without me noticing. Drops clung to the rose canes, glittering in the early afternoon sun. Beneath them, the tiny camera lay hidden under leaves, silent, but it had spoken for me. When the cruiser turned the corner, I stayed there in the after rain, gripping the umbrella handle till my knuckles went white. The siren faded, but inside me the snap of the cuffs kept echoing, cruel and freeing at once. The house was finally quiet after years of shouting. No more smashing, no more stomping, only shards of glass reflecting the face of an old woman who was finally clear-headed. I picked up each shard, hands shaking but strangely calm. When Ruth stepped in, she said nothing, just helped me gather the pieces scattered across the kitchen. "You need rest," she murmured. I nodded, but I couldn't sleep that night. In my head, I still heard Andrew's voice as he was taken away. "You'll regret this. I'm your son." 3 days later, the phone rang. The screen showed a cold line of text, "Inmate call, county jail." I hesitated. Kimberly had warned me, "Don't answer. He'll try to soften you." But part of me felt I needed to hear him, to fully understand the person I'd brought into the world. I picked up. "Mom." Andrew's voice was hoarse, weak. "I don't want to live here. I'm scared. You have to help me." "Help you?" I repeated, voice low. "That's all I've done for 3 years. That's not it. I was set up. They're making things up. I was just trying to protect you from legal trouble." I was silent, then answered softly, "Andrew, you don't need to pretend. Justice isn't something you can manipulate. I'm sorry, Mom. Please don't turn your back on me." I hung up. His voice echoed in my head, but it no longer had the power to soften my heart. A week later, Kimberly called. "The preliminary hearing is set for Thursday morning. Are you ready?" I nodded, though she couldn't see. Inside me was a small storm of fear and anticipation. The courtroom wasn't big, but it was packed. Andrew was led in wearing an orange jumpsuit, hair matted, eyes sunken. When he saw me, his lips trembled into a forced smile. I met him with a steady look. Ruth sat beside me, hand on my shoulder in quiet support. The judge, an older woman with a stern face, spoke. "We're here to consider the bail request for the defendant, Andrew Hill." His attorney rose, smooth as ever. "My client is a hard-working man who made mistakes under stress. He's the only caregiver for his elderly mother. We request bail pending trial." Kimberly stood solid as an oak. "Your Honor, my client, Mrs. Margaret Hill, doesn't need that kind of care. Here are photos of her injuries caused by the defendant, recordings of his threats, and video of the abuse. Additionally, he is under investigation for financial fraud and money laundering. If released, he could destroy evidence." She laid the documents down and played Ruth's recording. Andrew's voice filled the room. "Tomorrow you'll sign everything away. If not, you know the consequences." No one spoke. Even his lawyer faltered. The judge leaned toward him. "Mr. Hill, do you have any explanation for your words?" Andrew stammered. I was just angry. My mother misunderstood." "No, I understood just fine." I cut in, quiet, but firm. "You turned me into a servant and used me to legitimize your crimes. Now you're afraid of losing the freedom you took from me." The room fell silent. Andrew stared at me, the warmth that once lived in his eyes replaced by confusion and fear. The judge brought down the gavel. "After reviewing the evidence, the court denies bail. The defendant, Andrew Hill, will be remanded pending trial." Andrew leapt up, shouting, "No, this is all staged. My mother's crazy. She's senile. She just wants revenge." 2 officers held him down. I didn't flinch. I looked straight at him and knew there was nothing left to save. When court adjourned, I sat a moment longer, waiting for the hall to clear. Ruth whispered, "It's done, Margaret. He can't touch you now." I gave a tired smile. "I know, but what he broke lasts longer than bruises trust." We were almost at the door when a familiar voice called behind us, "Mrs. Hill." I turned. Jasmine stood there, hair loose, eyes swollen, coat wrinkled. She walked up, voice shaking. I'm sorry. I don't even know what to say. I've been scared for so long." I looked at her in silence. "He hit me," she blurted. "Many times. Once, right before you heard that bowl shatter. I didn't dare step in, didn't dare call the police. I thought if I endured it, he'd calm down. But the quieter I was, the worse he got." I saw her hands shaking. For a second, I realized the woman in front of me wasn't a proud accomplice anymore, but another victim. "You don't need to apologize," I said. "Fear makes people stay quiet." "I understand that." Tears ran down Jasmine's cheeks, one by one. "He took my money, too. The money my parents gave me to open a shop. He said he'd invest it, then it was gone." Ruth cut in, firm. If you're ready, tell everything to Kimberly. You can help bring him fully into the light." Jasmine nodded hard. "I will. I've been silent too long." I looked at her, hurting and relieved at once. "You're not just saving me, Jasmine. You're saving yourself." Kimberly walked up with a file in hand. "I heard. Thank you for coming. If you're willing to testify, this case will move forward in a big way." Jasmine gave a small, tearful smile. "I won't let him destroy anyone else." She turned to me and gently took my hand. "Thank you for not staying silent, Mrs. Hill. If you hadn't, I'd still be trapped in that house." I squeezed her hand and answered, my voice tight, "No one deserves to be called a victim." "Forever, Jasmine. We can all stand up, it just takes someone to go first." That afternoon, back at Ruth's house, I sat by the window. Late sunlight fell across the teacup on the table, casting a thin halo. Outside, Ruth's roses were still blooming, and the tiny camera lay quiet at the base, silent, steady, a witness that couldn't lie. Ruth set a hand on my shoulder and asked softly, "How are you feeling?" I smiled. "Lighter, not because he was arrested, because I'm not alone anymore." She nodded. "That's the real freedom." I looked toward the end of the street where the police car had driven past. Peace spread through me, the kind I thought I'd lost for good. 3 weeks after the hearing, when things seemed to have calmed down, I got an envelope from the Franklin County Jail. A yellow envelope, stamped censored, with a slanted handwriting I knew at once Andrew's. I was going to stick it in a drawer unopened, but my hand slid along the seal and tore it anyway. Inside were 2 neatly folded pages. His handwriting was still sharp and cold like a blade. "Mother, I know you're enjoying your new role, the brave woman, the celebrated survivor. But don't forget, I have documents from Hanover v. State in 2008 where you edited a witness file. If I send copies to the court, your guardian of justice image will pop like a soap bubble. Remember who told you to optimize the documents to avoid problems for the client? I still have that email with your e-signature. If you drop the charges, everything stays quiet. I'm giving you one chance." I let the letter fall. It felt like someone poured ice water down my back. Hanover versus State. That name stabbed through my memory. 15 years ago, I was still at Benton and Avery LLP. I was executive secretary to Richard Hale, then a senior partner, not yet the CEO of Northern Apex. He called me into his office that day and set a thick stack of files in front of me. "Margaret," he said, "we need to optimize this set a bit, cut some clutter, clean up wording so it's less harmful to the client." I remember asking, "Do you mean format or content?" He just smiled. "Format, of course." I didn't overthink it and did exactly as told. But a few weeks later, when the case ended, the press was loud about altered evidence, a big ethics flap. I was scared, but no one mentioned my name. The secret got buried with the years. Until today, when Andrew dug it up like an old grave. I sat for hours, staring at the letter. Wind pushed through the window and sent a few bills skittering across the table. My heart pounded. Suddenly light and sound felt far away. That afternoon, I brought the letter to Kimberly Hart's office. She finished reading, her face set. "He's blackmailing you," she said, each word clear. "I know. What scares me more is, he might be telling the truth." Kimberly took off her glasses and looked closely at me. "Did you actually alter documents in that case?" I cut a few sentences and swapped a few words. I didn't understand the law fully back then. I just did what my boss asked. She leaned back, thinking. "Legally, if we show you didn't knowingly do wrong, the risk to you is very small. But if he has materials and drops them at the right moment, the media will dig. They don't care who's at fault, they just want a story." I pressed a hand to my forehead, dizzy. I've already lost my standing in my own family. I can't bear being paraded in front of the world again. Kimberly spoke gently. "No one wants exposure, but if he holds something over you, You'll always be a hostage." That night, I told Ruth. She frowned slightly as she listened. "Hiding a secret is a victim's chain," she said. "I lived with a husband like that, always threatening to spill my secrets. I only got free when I said them first. I'm not as strong as you think, Ruth. I'm terrified." "No, you're just remembering what captivity felt like. You're forgetting you have light now, and the truth. And Kimberly." She stood to pour more tea. Steam rose, mint filled the kitchen, warm in a way that surprised me. I sat and felt my heartbeat slow. 2 days later, I got a second letter. Again from Franklin County Jail, this time with a photo. It was a shot of the handwritten note I made in 2008 while reworking the Hanover v. State report. My messy line, "Cut the witness section. Boss says it's unnecessary." Below it, Andrew had scribbled, "Remember your own handwriting? If you don't drop the charges, this photo goes to the media." There's also the Christmas bonus clip from that year. "People will think you helped launder money for the firm. I don't want to do this, but you're forcing me." The dizziness rushed back. I grabbed the table to steady myself. My mind reeled like someone yanked me back 15 years to a late-lit office, me at the keyboard, thinking I was just doing my job. The next morning, I brought everything to Kimberly. She looked at the photo and said, "He's smarter than I thought. He's tying 2 cases together, your old one and his current one, to distract and create doubt about your honesty. If the media bites, they'll assume you lied before, even if it's unrelated." What should I do? "Did you ever receive cash or gifts you didn't report while at Benton and Avery?" I hesitated, then nodded slightly. "Yes, a few times. Small things. I thought they were holiday thank yous. I didn't think it broke the rules." Kimberly exhaled. "Then, there's a small risk, but not big. I need you to be completely honest so I can protect you properly." I told her everything. A $200 Christmas envelope, a gift card from a client. Kimberly wrote it down and did a quick mental tally. At worst, if anyone digs, you could face a minor administrative penalty. No one's prosecuting that after so many years. The only real danger is your silence, because he's using it to scare you. She paused and looked straight at me. "Do you understand, Margaret? Every time you fear being exposed, he gains power. If you say it first, he has nothing left to threaten you with." I looked out the window at the light rain. Drops slid down the glass like the years I'd locked myself in fear. I asked, voice tight, "Say everything publicly? Can I live through that?" "You don't have to endure," Kimberly said softly. "You just have to be free." That night, Ruth brought over a fresh almond loaf. We ate in silence. When she stood to clear the plates, I asked, "If you were me, would you go public?" She thought a moment, then said, "I would, because if you don't, people will keep believing your fear is real. When you speak, they finally see how strong you are." She smiled and poured more tea. "The only thing that keeps people trapped isn't offense, Margaret. It's a secret." I looked into my cup, the steam hazy. In that soft blur, I saw Andrew's face as a boy, mischievous and trusting. Then I saw him now bitter, scheming, full of resentment. I knew if I stayed silent, he'd keep that chain around my neck. I drew a long breath and whispered, almost under my breath but sure, "Okay, Ruth, I'll tell everything." Her eyes lit. "That's the Margaret Hill I know." That night, I sat at the table with a blank sheet of paper. Warm light fell across the deep lines on my hands. I started to write, each word a little shaky. I, Margaret Hill, once inadvertently took part in editing documents in the Hanover versus State case under a supervisor's direction. I did not realize then that it could be considered improper. I never accepted money or benefits in exchange for that action. I choose to make this public not to justify myself, but to end all threats. When I signed my name, I felt weight to lift. It wasn't quite courage, it was freedom. I folded the page and set it beside Andrew's letter. Two worlds side by side, a secret for blackmail and a truth for release. And I knew, when morning came, I would take it to Kimberly. There was nothing left to fear. The next morning, I brought the statement to Kimberly's office. The sky was heavy, wind pushed hard down the avenue, sirens drifting far off. Each breath felt like lead. In my purse, the paper from last night rustled, reminding me this was a decision I couldn't undo. Kimberly read every line, her face unchanged until the end. After a few seconds of silence, she set it down and spoke slowly. "Do you know what this means, Margaret?" "I do. I'm incriminating myself." "Not exactly," she softened. "You're taking away his weapon. When a blackmailer has nothing to hold, his power evaporates." I sat still, fingers laced tight. Kimberly went on. "I have a proposal. We hold a press conference. You disclose this yourself. What happened in the past, that small violation. You tell your story, own it, and end it on your terms. Then Andrew can't control you anymore." Her voice was firm, but my chest clenched. I pictured a wall of lenses, flashing lights, headlines built to sting. "Mother accuses son of abuse, once tied to old scandal." "You want me to put it all out there?" Kimberly nodded. "Only light makes darkness vanish. The more you hide, the stronger he gets." I was quiet a long time. In my head, I heard familiar sounds, the shattering soup bowl from that night. Andrew yelling, "If you weren't my mother, you'd be sleeping on the street." Back then, I chose silence. And it almost cost me my life. I looked up, voice shaking but sure. I'd rather be judged in public than controlled in the dark. Kimberly smiled slightly. "I knew you'd say that." The press conference was set in a small hall at the Franklin County Prosecutor's Office, with local media and a few big outlets. When I walked in, camera lights hit my face so hard I had to squint. Ruth sat in the front row, clutching a handkerchief. Kimberly stood by the podium, calmly introducing, "Mrs. Margaret Hill will share her story, a mother, a survivor of abuse and financial exploitation, and a citizen willing to face her past." She gestured for me to step up. All eyes turned to me. For a moment I wanted to turn back, to hide in my small kitchen again, but I thought, if I retreat now, he wins again. I stepped up, adjusted the mic, and began. "For 3 years I lived in fear. I was afraid of my own son, afraid of the contempt in the house I bought with 40 years of work. I once believed a mother's love could fix everything, but you cannot fix someone who treats love like a tool for control." I drew a breath and looked at the line of cameras. My son, Andrew Hill, abused me physically and emotionally. He controlled my finances, forged my signature, and used my name to launder money. I was so afraid I stopped speaking, to the point I forgot who I was. I'm not telling this for sympathy. I'm telling it because silence never saves anyone. The room was so quiet you could hear pens scratch. I continued, "I also need to admit that 15 years ago, I made a mistake. In a case at my former firm, I edited documents without realizing it was against policy. I didn't do it for money or favors, but because I naively trusted my superior. I'm saying this today so my son can't turn it into a weapon against his mother. I accept responsibility in public, not because anyone forced me, but because I choose to be honest." A reporter stood. "Are you worried about being charged after this admission?" I answered softly, "If I have to pay for an old mistake to be free from fear, I'm willing. Freedom isn't free." Kimberly stepped up and signaled me to pause. She looked around the room. "Mrs. Hill's story shows the strength of lug. Truth. Our office confirms, after reviewing the records, she will not face criminal charges. We will focus on prosecuting Andrew Hill, who exploited his mother and tried to blackmail her." Murmurs spread. A middle-aged female reporter raised her hand. "Mrs. Hill, what would you say to those being abused or controlled right now?" I looked straight at the lens where I imagined hundreds of women sitting at kitchen tables, in nursing homes, in quiet houses. "I'd say this," I answered. "Don't let fear keep you a prisoner, whether it's your child, your spouse, or anyone. If they make you tremble every day, that isn't family. Believe in justice. It may be slow, but it doesn't go dark." Applause rolled through the room, not loud, but low, long, and sincere. In the front row, Ruth lifted a hand to wipe her eyes. When it wrapped, Kimberly came to me, voice full. "You did what many never dare, Margaret. He can't touch you now." I exhaled, my legs close to buckling. I just said what I should have said long ago. "Sometimes," she said, "courage isn't shouting. It's telling the truth in a steady voice." Outside the hall, reporters waited for more quotes. I smiled lightly and declined. I'd said enough, and for the first time, I didn't need to explain myself to anyone. That evening, Ruth and I sat on her porch. The sun slid behind the trees, painting the yard red. She handed me ginger tea, warmth spreading through me. "I saw the coverage," Ruth said. "Every outlet is praising you. One headline called you the mother who cut the blackmail chain." I gave a small laugh. "Sounds like a movie. Movies only copy real life, Margaret. Real life just hurts more." I leaned back and watched the roses tremble in the breeze. "Ruth, I thought I'd lost everything, my good name, my child. Trust. Turns out, when you lose everything, you find yourself." She nodded gently. "You got back the most important thing, your voice." Kimberly stopped by after dark with a folder. "Good news, the DA's office officially won't charge you. We're shifting all focus to Andrew." I took her hand, my voice catching. "Thank you, Kimberly. Without you, I'd still be shaking in my own house." "No," she smiled. "You just needed someone to remind you that you deserve to live without bowing your head." That night I slept in Ruth's living room. Moonlight slipped through the curtains and fell across my hands, hands that once trembled, signing endless forms, bore bruises, and shook with fear. Now they were still. I hugged the pillow, listened to the wind at the window, and felt something strange settle in. Real peace. No more nightmares, no more shouting. Just me, the moon, and the quiet softness of freedom. For the first time in years, I slept well. 3 weeks after the press conference, when the buzz had faded and "The Mother Who Spoke the Truth" headlines had been replaced by newer stories, I got an unexpected call. On the line was Owen Price, calm and courteous as ever. "Mrs. Hill, Mr. Richard Hale, CEO of Northern Apex, would like to meet you. He says this isn't just business." That name made my heart skip. Richard Hale, the boss who once said, "Just tweak a few sections in the Hanover v. State days." The man whose one sentence left me haunted for 15 years. I was quiet for a few seconds, then said, "Okay. Tell him I'll come." The next afternoon, I stood before Northern Apex's soaring glass tower, the same place that once made me shake just to walk in and clear my name. This time I came back not as someone under scrutiny, but as someone who had weathered a storm. Richard met me in the lobby, still as polished as ever, salt and pepper hair, crisp white shirt, navy tie. The difference was the smile, no arrogance, only contrition. "Margaret," he said, voice low, "I owe you an apology." I looked at him evenly. "For what?" "Richard, for telling me to optimize documents 15 years ago, or for not seeing my son committing crimes under your roof?" He lowered his head slightly, voice softer. "Both." We sat in a 20th floor conference room. Late light poured through the glass, laying pale gold across the table. Richard set a folder in front of me. "The internal investigation shows Andrew embezzled more than $130,000 over 2 years. Besides using your account, he sold confidential information to competitors for cash." I should have caught it sooner. I went still. Every number in the file was a fresh cut. I asked, oddly calm, "What do you plan to do now?" Richard laced his fingers. The company is pursuing criminal and civil action against Andrew Hill. But I also want to make amends for you and for this company." He looked at me, steady. "We'd like to bring you back, not as a secretary, but as an in-house ethics and compliance advisor. Starting salary, $4,000 a month. Additionally, the board has approved $50,000 in compensation for the indirect harm caused by Andrew's actions." "Everything's been cleared." I stared. "Are you serious?" "Serious. I'm not doing charity, Margaret. I need someone who understands how thin the line is between right and wrong and will never step over it again. You're that person." I looked out the window and saw the city blazing with sunlight. 3 years of abuse, a lifetime of steady work, and now here I was again, sitting before a door I once thought had slammed shut forever. I said softly, "You know, Richard, there was a time I thought I'd never walk into this building again. But if you believe in me, I'll try not to start over, but to end things the right way." He smiled, relieved. "Welcome back, Margaret Hill." In the days that followed, I went back to work every morning in my old white blouse, a pearl pin at the collar, and a new fast leather notebook under my arm. The smell of coffee in the lobby, the click of shoes on stone floors, everything reminded me of the years I'd lost. But this time, I wasn't anyone's paper runner. I sat in a small advisory office with Owen Price, reviewing the company's financial controls and auditing spending approvals. Owen looked over and smiled. "How does it feel to be back, Mrs. Hill?" I took a sip of tea. "Like cleaning up an old house after the roof caved in, only this time I brought new bricks." He laughed. "I'm keeping that line. We worked non-stop." I found a few more red flags in the archive's internal expense entries that lined up with transactions Andrew had made. Owen took careful notes and said Andrew might not have acted alone. A few days later, Jasmine walked into the office with a small black hard drive in her arms. "I found this in the old garage," she said. "He hid it behind a panel. I think it's company related. I took it from her. You sure you want to be part of this?" Jasmine pressed her lips together. "I've hidden long enough, I want to end it." Owen checked the drive and went pale. Inside were lists of files Andrew sold to a competitor, plus the emails between them. The evidence was enough to at least double his sentence. When Kimberly received the data, she called me that night. "You just changed the entire case. With this, Andrew won't just be convicted for money laundering, he's facing corporate betrayal charges too. You won." I was quiet for a moment, then said, "No, Kimberly. I've only just started again." A month later, at an internal company gathering, Richard stood at the podium in front of the staff. I sat in the front row with Owen and Jasmine. "We've been through a hard season," he said. "But out of the wreckage we learned the most important thing. Transparency is the foundation of trust. And the one who reminded me of that is Mrs. Margaret Hill." The room applauded. I bowed my head, warmed and a little embarrassed. Richard continued, "The company is creating a fund for victims of financial abuse called the Hill Foundation to honor the courage of a woman who turned pain into action." I couldn't hold back tears. Never in my life did I imagine my name would stand for anything good. Now it wasn't a mark of shame, but a symbol of standing up. After the ceremony, Owen clapped my shoulder. "How do you feel?" I smiled. Strange. 3 months ago, I was afraid to open my front door. Now I've been handed the keys to a new beginning. Jasmine came over and gently took my hand. "I signed up to volunteer with the Hill Foundation. I want to help women who were like us." I squeezed her hand. "Thank you, Jasmine." Sometimes a new door opens only when we dare to step out of the old house, even if it once meant everything. That afternoon, when I left the Northern Apex building, the sky was honey gold. I paused on the steps and took a deep breath. People hurried past, car horns, clicking heels, all of it blended into a living song I thought I'd never hear again. I smiled. No more trembling, no more bowed head. Ahead of me, The future stood open, like a bright doorway where the ruins had finally closed behind me. After the Hill Foundation announcement, my life settled into a new rhythm. But when the lights dimmed and the applause faded, I realized there was still a wound unhealed, not on my skin, but in my mind. Kimberly was the first to notice. "You've lived in fear too long, Margaret. Your body learned how to protect itself, but your mind hasn't. I think you should see a PTSD specialist." I hesitated, then agreed. In the first session, the doctor asked, "Do you often dream about old memories?" I nodded. "Every time I hear a bowl hit the table, I see his face, Andrew's. I wake up with my heart racing and my hands shaking." He took notes, voice soft as breath. "You lived too long. Under control. Now you need to learn to take back control of yourself." The session lasted more than 2 hours. I learned to breathe through panic and to stop apologizing for things that weren't my fault. Each exercise seemed simple: stand tall, look in the mirror, say, "I'm safe," but each one brought me to tears. I never thought I'd have to relearn the most basic thing: feeling at home in my own body. Ruth walked this road with me, patient as ever. She took me to a survivors group at the Franklin Community Center. In a small room with warm yellow lights, a dozen women sat in a circle with teacups in their hands, each carrying a different wound and the same look of someone who'd been choked by fear. When it was my turn, I stumbled over my words. My voice trembled as I began. "I'm Margaret Hill. I was abused by my son." I stayed silent for 3 years because I thought I deserved it. No one spoke, but a few nodded. A brown-skinned woman named Carla took my hand. "We get it. I used to think I was the worst person for not leaving sooner, but surviving is the first victory." The room broke into gentle applause, just enough for me to feel I wasn't alone. For the first time in years, I told it all about the soup bowl, the slaps, being stripped of my rights inside my own home. When I finished, my shoulders felt lighter, like I'd dropped an old stone that had clung to me from the past. In the mornings after that, I started putting my house back together. The wreckage from the police raid still lingered: stained walls, a cabinet with a long crack. Neighbors offered to repaint, but I declined. I wanted to keep a few fissures as proof of survival. I changed the curtains and set a white orchid on the sill. Each morning, when sunlight cut through the frame, my heart calmed. The house that once trapped me became the place I learned to live again. Kimberly still stopped by often. We spent many evenings practicing my testimony. "You'll need to stay calm when they try to provoke you," she said. "The defense will look for contradictions or question your memory." I gave a thin smile. "I lived 3 years with a man who called me senile. No one's shaking me now." Kimberly laughed. "That's exactly the energy I want." Each practice run, she played defense counsel and pressed hard. "Do you have proof Andrew hit you?" "Yes. Video and photos my neighbor recorded." "Do you admit you signed some papers that helped Andrew?" "I signed under duress. The proof is in messages and recordings in the black envelope." Kimberly nodded, satisfied. "Good. Calm, clear, no defensiveness. Let the truth speak." I rehearsed dozens of times in front of the mirror, down to the smallest detail. Each time I spoke, my voice steadied. My eyes stopped looking away. I was learning to stand tall with words. Meanwhile, Owen sent me the final financial report, more than 200 pages, proving Andrew stole company funds through 17 transactions and laundered them under my name. He set the binder on the table. "With these numbers, he has no way out." I nodded and thanked him. "Mr. Owen," I said, "thank you for believing me from the start." He smiled. "I just did the right thing. You're the one who walked out of the dark." At the same time, Richard emailed to confirm he had reimbursed every dollar Andrew took from my accounts, including interest. He wrote, "You taught me a lesson about honesty that 4 decades in this industry couldn't. I hope this money is just the beginning of a new life." I finished reading with tears I couldn't explain. Maybe because, for the first time in years, Someone called me by my full name, Mrs. Margaret Hill, without the word victim trailing behind it. On a quiet weekend afternoon, I took the old black envelope from my drawer. It had followed me through everything from the night of the slap to the day of the press conference. Now that the truth was out, it wasn't a weight anymore, just a relic from a time that was dead. I carried it to the backyard. Ruth stood beside me, silent. I lit a match. Flames rose and licked the papers, erased the forged signatures and tiny commas that once terrified me. As the ash lifted into the breeze, I felt clean. "How do you feel?" Ruth asked. I watched the thin smoke, like waking up from a nightmare and realizing I'm still alive. The night before the trial, my phone rang. The caller ID froze my breath. Franklin Correctional Facility. I hesitated a second, then answered. Andrew's voice came through, rough and tired. "Mom, it's me." I said nothing. "Mom, I know I was wrong. I don't want to go to prison. I just want you to forgive me, just once." I closed my eyes. For a moment I saw a 10-year-old boy, arms around my neck, begging forgiveness for breaking a vase. But the man's voice on the line pulled me back. "You made me afraid in my own home, Andrew. Now you're the one who's scared?" "I lost everything, Mom. You're all I have." I gripped the phone, strangely calm. "No, Andrew, you still have justice, and justice has to come before family." Silence. I heard his ragged breathing, then the click of the line. I set the phone down. In the mirror, the woman looking back wasn't trembling. I opened a drawer and took out the old lipstick coral red, the one Andrew mocked. "At your age, why bother?" I twisted it up and drew a thin line across my lips. Small, clean, a sign of strength, a reminder that I am still myself, no matter how often life tried to erase me. I smiled at my reflection. Tomorrow I would walk into court not just as a witness but as a survivor, a free woman. That morning the sky was gray and low with rain. I stepped from the car in front of the Franklin courthouse. Black shoes, newly polished, an old leather bag in my hand with my testimony, the coral lipstick, and a small slip of paper. "Stand tall, Margaret." Ruth had pressed it into my palm last night like a charm. Ahead, cold stone steps rose to a heavy wooden door. Reporters clustered on both sides, shutters clicking. I heard Kimberly call, "Mrs. Hill over here." She wore a navy suit, eyes bright and steady. "You okay?" "I am," I smiled. "It's time to end this." The courtroom was big, high-ceilinged, and bright with white lights. Paper, wood, and worry mingled in the air. I sat in the front row beside Kimberly. Across the aisle, Andrew was cuffed in a gray jail uniform, hair messy, beard patchy. I barely recognized the son who once kissed my forehead every morning. The prosecutor read the charges clearly from the board. Domestic abuse, financial embezzlement, extortion, witness intimidation. Each word landed like a hammer. I didn't shake. I sat with my hands folded in my lap, listening as my past was read aloud, not to shame me this time, but to find justice. Jasmine testified first. Small frame, hair pulled back, hands clenched. Her voice wavered at first, but steadied as she spoke. "I lived with him for 2 years. In that time, he hit me, took my money, and threatened me if I told anyone. I used to think his mother was the only person he respected. Then I learned he respects no one." The room was silent. Andrew wouldn't look at her. When she read the threatening messages he sent, a few jurors lowered their eyes. As she stepped down, her eyes found mine. There was no hate there, only tired compassion. I nodded. She nodded back, as if we had both come through the same storm. Next was Owen. He took the stand with a thick stack of documents and walked the court through a systematic pattern of fraud. The defendant, Andrew Hill, used his position in finance to move company funds into accounts under his mother's name, Mrs. Margaret Hill, who had no knowledge of it. The total is $132,400 over 17 transfers, with verified evidence of forged signatures. Owen put each statement on the screen, every bank page, every mismatch. His voice was even and sure. When he finished, he glanced my way, as if to say, "We did it." The defense tried to push back, claiming Andrew just asked his mom to move money as a favor. Owen answered cleanly, "No one needs a favor 70 times across 3 different states over 2 years." A small chuckle rippled through the room. Andrew bowed his head, jaw tight. Then it was my turn. Kimberly touched my arm and whispered, "You're ready." I stood and walked to the stand. My footsteps sounded on the floor like a calm heartbeat. When I looked up, dozens of eyes were on me, jurors, press, the prosecutor, and Andrew. I began in a voice so steady it surprised me. "I'm Margaret Hill, 68. I'm the defendant's mother." Silence. I faced the judge and told it all, each piece, each memory I'd once tried to bury. From small insults, Andrew turned me into a live-in maid in my own house. Every month, my retirement check disappeared. Every time I asked, he said, "I'm just managing it for you." I stayed because I thought a mother's love might save a person. But the night he threw a bowl of soup in my face, I understood that if I didn't fight back, I would die a little every day. I told them about Owen, the 18th floor, the forgeries, the crushing grip on my wrist, and the final blackmail letter. I explained how I confessed my old mistake in public to sever his power over me. Each sentence felt like a cut, but one that freed me, not hurt me. The defense rose to cross-examine. "Mrs. Hill," he said, "you admit mistakes in the Hanover v. State matter, correct? How can we trust the memory of a 68-year-old? A murmur rose. I took a breath. I can forget dates. I will never forget what it felt like when my son's hand was on my throat. If you need help with your memory, the video my neighbor recorded will jog it. Kimberly smiled and signaled. Ruth stepped forward and submitted the memory card. The footage filled the screen, Andrew shouting, forcing me to sign, his voice clear. "If you don't sign, you lose everything." No one made a sound. Even the judge gripped his armrest. When the video ended, Kimberly turned to the defense and said softly, "Any more questions about my client's memory?" He said nothing and sat down. The room thickened with quiet. Andrew's head hung, his shoulders sagged. I saw the collapse, not loud or dramatic, just an absolute emptiness when a man loses the power he thought he'd keep forever. The jury conferred briefly. Then one juror stood to read the verdict. "We find the defendant, Andrew Hill, guilty on all counts." The judge nodded, voice firm. "The defendant is sentenced to 18 years in prison and must pay full restitution." The gavel struck 3 times, echoing. I closed my eyes and let the sound etch itself into me, a period at the end of 3 years of hell. Andrew looked up at me. His eyes were hollow, no hatred, just the pit of late understanding. I didn't speak. I gave a small nod, not forgiveness, goodbye. As I left the courtroom, Kimberly took my hand. "You did it." I smiled, hoarse. "No, we did." Outside, the noon sun hit the courthouse steps. I stood still and filled my lungs with warm air. A breeze lifted a few gray hairs and carried the scent of freedom, the smell I'd forgotten. Farther down, Ruth and Jasmine waited, each holding a small flower. When I reached them, they said nothing, just hugged me tight. For the first time in years, I truly stood tall. Not a mother begging for mercy, but a woman who saved herself from a twisted version of family. On the drive home, I rolled down the window and let the wind wash over my face. I watched the trees and houses go by and told myself, the world is still beautiful. I just spent too long afraid to look at it. And now I can. The next spring, when the maples by my porch began to bud, I officially started my new job at Northern Apex as an ethics and compliance advisor. My office was small, a desk, a bookcase, a window on the park. But every morning, when I powered up my computer and steeped mint tea, it felt like a miracle. I was still here, and I got to begin again. I moved slower, breathed deeper, laughed more. The scars in my mind didn't vanish, but they stopped running me. I used my freedom like air, light, natural, without guilt for being happy. I remodeled the old house not to erase the past, but to let the light in. I opened the curtains each morning so sun poured through the living room and glinted off the photo of me and Ruth at the Hill Foundation launch. The walls were a warm cream now, but I left a few small cracks, like time scars, not pretty but honest. Ruth is almost the only family I have left. She shows up in the mornings with a basket of warm pastries and an easy laugh. We plant flowers on the porch and talk about ex-husbands, our kids, and the small things that make two 68-year-old women feel at peace. One afternoon, Ruth asked, "Are you still angry at your son?" I smiled, looking out at the roses. I don't know if it's anger anymore. Maybe regret for the child I once believed would be good. But angry? No, I just won't let him hurt me ever again. I wrote a long letter to Benton and Avery, the firm where I worked for 40 years. I didn't accuse anyone. I urged them to strengthen ethical processes and to require an independent audit each year so the line between what's legal and what's convenient can't blur. A week later, the new managing partner called to thank me and offered an honorary advisor role. I declined. I don't need a title. I just need to know the mistakes I made won't repeat. From the Hill Foundation's early success, Kimberly, Owen, and I launched a small project called Light After Silence, a fund supporting older women abused or financially coerced. We host workshops, offer free legal consults, and raise money for shelters. Every time a hesitant woman walks through our door, I see myself from 3 years ago, hair unkempt, dark circles, hands shaking around an envelope of papers. But when they leave with a faint smile, I know light is spreading slowly, but it holds. In July, Kimberly asked me to speak at the National Conference on Domestic Violence and Elder Financial Abuse. Standing before a big hall and hundreds of silent faces, I wasn't afraid. I began with a simple line: "Secrets only have power when we let them live in the dark." I told my story not for praise, but so someone trembling out there would know they aren't alone. When I finished, the room stood and applauded, and in the crowd I saw dozens of wet eyes. I bowed. Not a victim, not the wounded, a survivor. One late night while I was making tea, the phone rang. The screen read, "Franklin Correctional Facility." My heart pinched, but I picked up. Andrew's voice was low and rough. "Mom, I just want to ask, will you ever forgive me?" I said nothing. He breathed hard, then added, "I don't expect to get out early. I just want to know if you still see me as your son." I drew a long breath. "Andrew," I said slowly, "I don't know when you'll understand this, but forgiveness isn't erasing. When you learn to apologize to yourself, when you truly understand what you did, maybe then I can forgive." Silence. Then he whispered, "I understand." I answered gently, "I hope one day you really will." The call ended, and it felt like a chapter closed, not with hatred, but with the peace of someone who no longer needs to strike back. That night I sat at my desk and opened my old leather journal. Outside, the moon slid across the window frame and drew a pale line on the page. I wrote the final sentence. I won not against my son, but against fear. I shut the book, switched off the light, and sat quietly in the soft dark where a strand of brightness still slipped through the curtain and lay across my face. Not dazzling, not harsh, just enough for me to see that I was smiling. Thank you for staying with me to the very end of my story. If you're reading this, maybe you know what it is to be afraid, alone, or hurt by those you love. I hope my story can be a small lamp to remind you there's a way back, and you can live free, strong, and at peace. Where are you watching from in this big world? Leave a comment below and share your thoughts about the power of truth, about the times you stood up when everything seemed to collapse. If this story touched your heart, please Like, subscribe, and turn on the bell so we can keep listening to more courageous journeys together. Because sometimes a single comment, a single share from you can be the small light that helps someone else find their way out of the dark.
Did you finish the cake? Answer me. Gavin's voice shook through the phone, trembling like someone desperate. I was about to tell him I hadn't eaten a single piece of the walnut cake he sent when he suddenly screamed, Don't eat it. Who did you give it to?" I froze. I had brought the box of cake to Gavin's house the night before and told Rebecca to share it with the kids. I heard my son's breath hitch, then the sound of something crashing on his end of the line. I didn't understand. But that reaction wasn't from someone worried his mother hadn't received a gift. It was the reaction of a man who had just lost control of his own plan. And in that moment, I knew whatever was in that box wasn't meant to celebrate my birthday. It was meant to end it. If you're still listening, tell me where you're watching from. Every comment you leave is another mark in this journey. And if this story has touched you, don't forget to hit like so it can reach even further. I stayed silent for a few seconds, not because I didn't know what to say, but because my heart felt crushed tight, refusing to beat in its normal rhythm. On the other end, I heard Gavin gasping, footsteps pacing frantically, then a sharp scrape like a chair being yanked across the floor. "Gavin, what's happening, son?" I tried to steady my voice. "Answer me," he screamed again. "Who did you give it to? Did you eat any? Did anyone in your house eat it?" I sat down on the wooden chair by the kitchen window, looking out at my small garden covered in golden Oregon fall leaves. Everything looked peaceful, just like every other morning, except my son's voice didn't belong to that world. I took it to your house last night. Rebecca said the kids like nutcakes, so I thought... I didn't finish before Gavin let out a choked sound, like someone had just pressed a knife to his throat. "Oh, God, no, no." I heard more crashing, then curses, words I had never heard from his mouth when he was a little boy dragging his blanket to my room because he was afraid of the dark. "Gavin, talk to me. What's going on with the cake?" My voice was shaking now. He didn't answer immediately. All I heard were breaths, heavy, erratic, like someone losing his mind. Finally, Gavin forced out a sentence that chilled me to the bone. "Mom, do you know what you just did?" I stared at the empty cake box on my kitchen counter, the cream-colored box with a red ribbon tucked inside a paper bag printed with the logo of a fancy bakery in Seattle. Honestly, I had been surprised when I saw it. Gavin was never the type to buy anything luxurious for me. He had barely remembered my birthday in the 3 years since he married Rebecca. I hadn't expected anything this year either. I planned to buy myself a slice of apple pie, light a small candle, and spend the evening reading. But when I opened the door and saw that gift box sitting neatly on my porch, I smiled, a smile that now feels painfully naive. I even stood there for a moment in the warm afternoon light thinking, maybe my son still remembers me. Maybe things aren't as bad as I thought. I used to believe that. Even when Gavin slowly drifted away after marrying Rebecca, each phone call shorter, each hug colder. I still believed that somewhere inside him was the little boy I carried in my arms when he was 2 years old, the boy I adopted after the accident that took his birth parents. I poured all my love, money, and strength into raising him. But now, with Gavin's voice shaking like he was about to lose his mind, I understood something. The man shouting into the phone wasn't that boy anymore. I pressed again. "Tell me clearly, what's wrong with the cake?" Gavin was silent for a moment, then spoke hoarsely, each word squeezed from his throat. "Don't let anyone eat more. Don't let anyone eat anymore. Do you hear me?" My arms stiffened. Why eat more? Does that mean someone already ate? A cry burst through the phone, making my hair stand on end. It was Rebecca. I heard her scream. "Marjorie! Liam just threw up again. Emma's stomach hurts. I'm calling 911. My blood stopped flowing. The kids, my 2 grandchildren I loved more than life itself, had eaten the cake Gavin thought I would eat. I jumped up, dropping the mug in my hand. "Rebecca! How are they? Oh, God, I didn't know." Rebecca didn't answer me. I only heard footsteps, a door opening, and the sound of her picking up one of the kids. Then the distant voice of a 911 operator echoed through the phone. I stood in my kitchen, legs giving out beneath me. My phone slid from my hand onto the table, but I didn't pick it up. It took a long moment before Gavin spoke again, each word sharp as a blade. "Get them to the hospital now, and don't go anywhere. You ruined everything." That last sentence shattered me. I ruined everything? Me? I didn't answer. Gavin hung up before I could ask anything else. I sank into the chair, my hands trembling uncontrollably, fingers gripping the edge of the table. I didn't dare think the thought forming in my mind, but my heart, whether I wanted it or not, whispered something terrifying. Gavin wasn't afraid for me. He was afraid because his plan had gone wrong. It took nearly 2 minutes before I had enough breath to call an Uber to Gavin's house. I was shaking so badly I could barely buckle the seatbelt. I remember only saying to the driver, "Please, please hurry." A 15-minute drive turned into a trip straight into hell. I watched the world blur past. Rows of red maple trees, the cafe where I read the morning paper, Mr. Jim's convenience store where he sold candy to the kids. Everything felt foreign and terrifying. When the car stopped in front of Gavin's house, I heard ambulance sirens. Rebecca was carrying Emma. A paramedic carried Liam. The kids were pale, lips dry, eyes unfocused. I rushed toward them. "Rebecca, I'm sorry." "Oh, God, I didn't know," I said, my voice almost collapsing. Rebecca didn't look at me. She said, quickly, "They think it might be food poisoning, but something's wrong. The cake smelled metallic. I don't understand why Gavin keeps... She glanced around. "Where is he?" I shook my head. As the ambulance disappeared into the night, I stood alone in front of my son's house, a place I had visited hundreds of times, with Christmas gifts, home-baked cookies, toys for the kids. But tonight, only cold wind and terror filled that yard. Why had Gavin reacted like that? Why scream knowing I shared the cake? Why disappear when the kids got sick? I knew why. I didn't want to believe it, but I knew. My son had sent me a trap, and the ones who fell into it were my innocent grandchildren. In the second Uber chasing the ambulance to the hospital, I realized my 71-year-old life had just split into a before and an after. I didn't know then that what awaited me wasn't just the truth about that cake, but the truth about the son I raised for 40 years, and that this night was only the beginning of a storm that would tear my family apart. I arrived at the hospital so fast I don't remember walking through the ER doors. Only when my hand gripped the counter, chest heaving from running, did I realize I was inside. Rebecca stood there. Her eyes were red and swollen, mascara streaking down her face. When she saw me, she shook her head weakly and led me toward the pediatric emergency room. The door opened, and I saw Liam and Emma lying on hospital beds, tiny bodies under crisp white blankets, their skin an alarming shade of gray. The scene hit me like a winter wind through a broken window. I stepped closer. Liam, Emma, oh God. My voice trembled so hard each word felt separate from the next. Rebecca wiped her tears. The doctors are testing. They said it might be poisoning. I don't know. Her voice broke. I looked at the IV lines, the monitoring stickers on their little chests, and the terror in Rebecca's eyes. Even though she and I had never been close, I saw in her face the raw pain of a mother watching her children suffer. I turned to find Gavin. He was standing in the corner, pressed against the wall. His shoulders shook slightly, his hand gripping a water bottle so tightly his knuckles were white. His eyes avoided everything. Rebecca, me, even his own reflection. "Gavin," I whispered. He jolted like someone shaken awake from a nightmare. The water bottle slipped from his hand again, rolling across the floor with a hollow clatter. He bent to pick it up, but his hands were shaking uncontrollably. I walked closer. "Calm down. What happened?" Gavin didn't answer. He just backed farther into the wall as if trying to disappear inside it. Then the doctor walked in with a paper in his hand. "We have the preliminary results," he said, voice steady but tense. "The children show signs of exposure to an inorganic toxin. We're running further tests, but it strongly resembles arsenic." The entire room seemed to lose all air. Arsenic. I'd heard that word only in crime shows, not in a hospital room where my grandchildren lay motionless. Rebecca covered her mouth. Gavin looked like someone had punched the breath out of him. He lost his balance and braced himself against the wall. I saw it. The moment the water bottle slipped from his hand a second time. "Arsenic?" Rebecca asked, voice cracking. The doctor nodded. "We need to know everything they ate within the last 6 hours." Rebecca turned to me, her eyes wide and hollow. "Mom, where did that cake come from?" Her gaze pierced me. I swallowed hard. "Gavin sent it to me. It was for my birthday. I only brought it over because I thought the kids would like it." Rebecca froze. Her face shifted from fear to shock to a painful understanding. "Gavin, you," she whispered, but he cut her off. "Don't you dare say that," he snapped, his voice sharp like metal clashing. Rebecca stepped toward him, her eyes burning. "Don't say that? You freaked out the second Mom said she brought the cake. You disappeared for half an hour. You're hiding something, Gavin." He grabbed her shoulders, desperate, trembling. I said, "Stop talking." I had never seen my son like this. Not angry, not anxious, but terrified. A terror rising from somewhere deep inside him, a terror of someone who knew he had done something unforgivable. The doctor stepped out to continue treating the kids. Rebecca backed away toward their beds. Gavin turned his face away, hiding whatever expression he didn't want us to see. I stood in the center of that small room, under the harsh white fluorescent light and the sharp smell of antiseptic. Everything blurred and spun. And as I looked at my 3 family members, Gavin avoiding my eyes, Rebecca trembling, the children lying limp in their beds, I felt the scattered pieces in my memory start to fall into place. The family dinners Gavin said I didn't need to attend, the calls he ignored, the comments Rebecca made that stung like needles. "You should keep some distance so we can build our own family. You're always getting in the way. Our life doesn't need extra complication." It wasn't just distance. It was a pushing away, with intention. And now, in this cold hospital room, I finally saw it. There was something deeper, darker, more rotten inside my family than I ever imagined. Rebecca turned to me, and her eyes were different. No contempt, no coldness, only fear, guilt, and pain. She stepped forward, voice shaking. "Mom, I'm sorry. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know." I placed my hand on her shoulder. "I know. Now isn't the time for blame. Just focus on the kids. Gavin spun around, eyes dark. Don't talk like you had nothing to do with this. If you hadn't brought the cake— Gavin Wells, I said slowly, my voice so calm it startled even me. I brought it because I trusted you, because I thought you sent something good for me. And now you dare blame me? Gavin went silent, and that silence was louder than any confession he could have made. I looked at my son for a long time. That face used to be my pride. Those eyes once lit up every time he showed me one of his childhood drawings. Those hands once held mine when he cried because he was afraid to sleep alone. Now, none of that was there anymore. Standing in front of me was a man whose eyes kept avoiding mine, whose hands were shaking, and whose breath carried a dark secret leaking out with every exhale. When the doctor returned to say Liam was showing signs of improvement but still needed toxin monitoring, Rebecca broke down sobbing. I pulled her into my arms the way I would hold my own daughter. Gavin watched us, his face twisted, stretched tight like a string about to snap. I could see a flicker of regret on him. But regret for what? For the kids being poisoned? Or because his plan failed? I couldn't tell the difference yet, but my instinct, the same instinct that carried me through 8 decades of life, told me this: some cracks only show when the light is strong enough, and today that light had finally begun to break through the surface of my family. When the nurse walked in and asked us to leave so they could continue more tests, I held Rebecca's hand and squeezed gently. I'll stay here. I'm not going anywhere. Rebecca nodded. As for Gavin, he turned away, slipped out, and disappeared down the hallway like a shadow who knew his time was running out. I stood outside the hospital room, leaning against the white wall, watching my son's back grow smaller in the distance. I wanted to call him back. I wanted to believe that some part of the child I raised still existed inside that man. But the longer I watched, the colder I felt. Not the cold of the hospital, but the cold your soul feels when it finally understands. My family was rotting from the inside, and I had closed my eyes to it for far too many years. That night, after the kids were moved to the observation unit, after Rebecca curled up in the waiting room chair, and after Gavin vanished somewhere in the city, I knew this was only the beginning of a very long and very painful truth. I sat in the pediatric waiting area, my fingers interlocked so tightly my knuckles turned white. Rebecca leaned her head against the wall, her eyes swollen. Every few minutes she got up and paced a short distance like someone trapped between fear and grief, with nowhere to put either of them. The ER doors opened. The doctor stepped out, his face tense, though his voice stayed professionally calm. "We have more accurate results," he said. "The children were exposed to arsenic, low dose, but still dangerous. We'll continue monitoring and detox treatment." Arsenic. This time, the word wasn't some vague term from a crime novel. It was something flowing in the oiforme veins of my grandchildren. 2 children who should be thinking about weekend homework, soccer games, and art class, not a toxin that could take their lives. Rebecca clutched her chest as if someone had squeezed her heart. I walked to her and placed my hand on her shoulder. "Rebecca, they're getting good care. They're doing everything they can." For the first time in years, she didn't pull away when I touched her. She didn't stiffen, didn't give me a polite, forced smile. She just looked at me, her eyes filled with something she had never allowed me to see before. Trust, even if only a small flicker, like the last bit of light at the end of a long tunnel. Gavin appeared a few minutes later. He moved fast, almost running, breathing hard, his coat thrown on crookedly, hair messy. He didn't look like a worried father. He looked like a man running from something, like someone who just heard the police were closing in. "What did the doctor say?" Gavin asked, but he didn't look at Rebecca or me. "Arsenic," Rebecca said, her voice hoarse. "The kids were poisoned with arsenic." Gavin blinked rapidly, then glanced around as if looking for an exit. "I have to go," he said urgently. "I have something I need to handle. I can't stay." Rebecca grabbed his sleeve. "What could be more important than your children lying in the emergency room? Gavin, what is wrong with you?" He yanked his arm back, hard enough that Rebecca nearly stumbled. "I said you don't understand. I have to go." I stepped forward. "Gavin, sit down. I need to talk to you." "No, not now." "Yes, now," I said, my voice firm, "because I have a feeling you know exactly what's happening." Gavin finally looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time since all this began, and in his eyes, I didn't see worry. I didn't see pain. I saw fear. A kind of fear not directed at the children, but at himself. I stared straight into my son's eyes. "Gavin, tell me, what was in that cake?" "I don't know," he yelled. Too fast, too defensive. I did not look away. "Gavin Wells, I'm asking one last time, what was in that cake?" A second of silence fell, a second that felt like a lifetime. Then Gavin exploded. "It was supposed to be you," he screamed, his voice cracking but sharp like metal scraping steel. "Not the kids." It felt like the floor vanished beneath me. The air around us froze instantly. Rebecca slapped her hand over her mouth and collapsed to her knees. I stood there, my hand trembling, my breath breaking, my mind echoing those 7 words over and over. It was supposed to be you. That one sentence crushed 40 years of motherhood, crushed every dinner I skipped so I could buy him school clothes, crushed every night I stayed awake when he had a fever so bad he convulsed, crushed every word I ever said, every ounce of pride, every drop of unconditional love I poured into him. I looked at my son, but I no longer recognized the person standing there. Rebecca turned to me, tears streaming. "Mom, does that mean She didn't finish her sentence, but she didn't have to. We both knew. Gavin slammed his hand against the wall, his face flushed. "You always share everything, always giving things away. I send you a gift, and you give it to someone else. You've done that all your life." I don't know whether Rebecca's sobbing or the sound of my own heartbreaking was louder. "What are you talking about, Gavin?" I breathed. "I share because I thought everything was meant for the family." "No," he shouted. "You share because you don't know how to keep anything for yourself. You give everything to the whole world and expect everyone to thank you. I don't want your kindness. I want you to know your place." Rebecca screamed through her tears. "Your place? She's your mother." Gavin turned on her and pointed directly at her face. "What do you know? My mother always interferes, always shows up, always has an opinion. Without her, we'd have fewer problems." Rebecca stepped back, as if he had slapped her. I thought your mother was the problem. But you did this to her?" Gavin looked away. "I don't have time for this. I have to go." "Go where?" I asked, softly, barely recognizing my own voice. Gavin didn't answer. Then he took a step like he was about to run again. "Gavin!" I called, using the last breath of someone who had just been stabbed in the heart. "Look at me." For the first time, he looked at me for real, and in his eyes, I knew. I knew more clearly than any confession he could have made. Rebecca sobbed. "He was going to kill you. Oh God, he was going to kill you." Gavin looked at Rebecca, then at me, his face twisted, full of desperation but no remorse. Then he turned and ran. Ran like something was chasing him. Ran like if he didn't run, he'd be swallowed whole. His footsteps echoed down the tile hallway of the hospital until they faded behind a corner. I stared after my son's disappearing shadow. My legs gave out. I collapsed onto the chair like someone swept up by a storm. "I can't believe it," I whispered, holding my head. "My son. How could he?" Rebecca sat beside me, tears falling openly. No pretending, no coldness, no distance anymore. "Mom, Marjorie, I'm sorry. I was wrong to think you were a burden, wrong to think you were interfering. I didn't know he had lost all humanity." I placed my trembling hand over hers. I don't blame you." Rebecca cried like a child, raw, broken, stripped of every wall she ever put up. We sat there together, two women who had once kept their distance, once misunderstood each other, beside the beds where Liam and Emma were fighting the poison in their blood. In that moment, I realized my family had been rotting for a long time. Tonight, the paint finally peeled off, exposing the truth underneath. And that truth wasn't just that my son wanted to kill me. The truth was also that I, by trusting too much, yielding too much, loving too much, had let things spiral this far. Rebecca gripped my hand tighter. "Mom, I promise I'll be here for you. I won't let you be alone." That promise was the only light in the darkest night of my life. I left the hospital when the sky had already grown dark. The parking lot lights flickered on one by one, casting soft yellow patches across the pavement, still damp from the afternoon drizzle. Rebecca stayed with the kids. I needed a few minutes alone, not to rest, but to face what I knew I had to do next. I sat in my car, hands on the steering wheel, but not starting the engine yet. The rearview mirror reflected my eyes, red, swollen, but strangely bright. I had cried enough. I had hurt enough. And now something was rising inside me. Something I had never allowed myself to feel in 40 years of motherhood. The will to survive and defend myself. I knew where Gavin would go. He always went there whenever his life fell apart. After losing jobs, after fights with his wife, after debts he couldn't pay. My sister Paula's house. Paula had always treated Gavin like her own child. Even when he was wrong, falling apart, selfish or cruel, Paula always had one sentence to defend him. "He's just under pressure." Ever since our parents died, Paula had always been soft toward Gavin, and Gavin knew exactly how to exploit that weakness. I started the car. The hospital faded behind me, while the faces of my two grandchildren cut into my mind like a fresh wound. The drive to Paula's house was about 15 minutes. I passed quiet streets, shops that had closed early, the dim glow of street lamps. Everything looked peaceful, so unlike the chaos inside me. When I arrived, Gavin's car was parked right at the entrance, the old gray one with patches of peeling paint. I stopped the car, let the engine run a few more seconds, then turned it off. No rushing, no trembling, no fear. I walked up the steps and heard Paula's voice inside, the shaky tone of someone trying to reassure, maybe herself. I knocked. Paula opened the door after only a few seconds. Her eyes were red and swollen, clashing awkwardly with the forced smile she attempted when she saw me. "Marjorie, what are you doing here at this hour?" Her voice quivered. "Gavin is here," I said plainly. "I need to see him." Paula hesitated, blocking the doorway as if trying to keep me out. "Gavin, he just needs some time. He's panicking under pressure. You know, everything—" "I know," I cut in. "That's exactly why I need to see him." Without waiting for her reaction, I pushed the door gently and stepped inside. Paula didn't have the strength to stop me. Gavin stood in the middle of the living room, hands in his pockets, shoulders slumped, eyes hollow. But when he saw me, he didn't show fear, regret, or even hurt. He straightened, his back stiff, eyes cold like a stranger. "Oh, you're here." No emotion, no remorse, not one word asking about Rebecca or the kids. My chest tightened, but my voice stayed frighteningly calm. "Gavin," I said, "why?" He let out a short snort, looking away as if my question annoyed him. "You've lived too long," he said. "I need the inheritance." I froze as if turned to stone. Paula's eyes widened. Her hand flew to her mouth. "What did you say?" I asked again, though I knew I heard him clearly. He took a step closer, no longer hiding anything. "I saw your savings. $300,000. I'm drowning in debt. The loan sharks are closing in. I need money. And you're healthy, living your long life with no intention of slowing down. What do you need it for?" I heard Paula gasp in horror. I remained still. My hands were ice cold, but my heartbeat slowed strangely. Gavin kept going, as if he were talking about refinancing a mortgage, not murdering his own mother. "You're almost 70. You're not useful anymore. I have a family to take care of, a future. You're just taking up space." I looked straight at the face of the boy I had raised since he was 2, the same face that once buried itself in my chest during nightmares, hugged me whenever he got an A, called Mom in a shaky voice after falling off his bike, and suddenly I realized, in all those memories, I was the one holding him. He had never once held me. Paula stammered, "Gavin, what are you saying? You can't—" "Be quiet," he snapped. "I'm talking to my mother." I raised a hand to signal Paula not to speak. "Gavin," I asked, my voice even to the point I barely recognized myself, "you plan to use arsenic." He shrugged. "It's the easiest way. No trace, no suspicion. A heart attack at your age, everyone would buy it." Paula screamed, "Gavin, you're insane. Do you know the kids ate it too?" "You always share everything," he said, frowning. "It was supposed to be you. I didn't tell you to give it to anyone else. You made it complicated." Paula covered her face. As for me, my whole body felt weightless, an emptiness so deep it was frightening. But strangely, beneath the ruins, something cold and sharp flickered awake, a sliver of clarity. I didn't scream, didn't accuse, didn't beg, didn't ask why he saw his own mother as an obstacle. I only asked the one question I needed to hear to erase any last shred of hope. "You never loved me, did you?" Gavin looked at me as if I had asked the most ridiculous question in the world. "Love? You raised me, sure, but I didn't ask you to. You chose that. You don't owe anyone love, so why would I? You did what you wanted, and now I need you to give some back, that's all." Paula broke down crying. I just stood there, looking at my son, silent, a silence that hollowed out the air. Finally, I turned to Paula. "You don't need to say anything," I said softly. "You didn't cause this." Paula trembled as she came closer and held my arm. "Marjorie, I'm sorry. I didn't know. I thought, it's all right," I said. "Now you know." I looked at Gavin one last time. He stood there, out of patience, out of excuses, only the bare cruelty left. A man who once called me mother, but never saw me as anything more than a wallet. I opened the door. Cold air rushed into the living room. Standing in the doorway, I spoke in the calmest voice I had ever used, strengthened by an entire lifetime behind it. "Gavin, you chose your path, and I will choose mine." I stepped out onto the porch. The door closed behind me with a soft click, but that sound echoed inside me like a bell tolling. As I walked down the steps, I knew this more clearly than anything in my life. My revenge, not with knives, not with poison, but with truth and justice, begins tonight. If you're still listening to this story and feel the ache of a mother betrayed by her own child, please tell me where you're watching from in the comments, or leave a few words so I know we're walking through this together. I drove away from Paula's house in complete silence. Portland at night looked softer, streetlights reflecting on the damp pavement, stretching the shadow of my car into a long, dark ribbon. But inside me, nothing felt soft. No more trembling, no more crying, no more holding on. The night sky pressed against the windows, and my heart pressed against a truth I had avoided my whole life. I had to change. Not for Gavin, not for Rebecca, not for the kids, for myself. A woman who had spent more than half her life in quiet sacrifice, believing love alone was enough. But tonight I saw the true nature of the son I'd raised since he was 2. A truth I could no longer turn away from, no longer forgive, no longer soothe with tears or prayer. I parked by the park near my home, turned off the engine and leaned back in the seat. Outside, Portland was calm, as if nothing terrifying had happened. But I felt like someone who had just escaped a fire, my chest still smoldering. I inhaled deeply. And in that moment, I knew more clearly than ever, I would not let him destroy even one more minute of my life. The next morning, I walked into attorney Martin Cole's office. Martin was an old friend of my late husband, a man who had worked in the field for 40 years, known for never losing a complicated family case. His hair was evenly gray at the sides, his face seasoned, but his eyes sharp as steel, like someone who had witnessed too many tragedies to believe in innocence. When I told him everything, from the cake, the hospital, to Gavin's confession, he sat still for a long moment, hands clasped together. "Marjorie," he said quietly, "I'm sorry you had to go through this, but you came to the right person. If you want to protect yourself and the children, we'll have to fight." "I want to," I said plainly. "Are you ready to become a different woman?" he asked, looking straight at me. I nodded. Not ready. Already beginning. Martin immediately handed me a list of tasks for the next 72 hours. Close all old accounts. Open new ones at a different bank with strict security. Change every safe lock. Update the will. Gather evidence. Prepare to charge Gavin with 3 counts: financial abuse, intentional harm, and attempted murder. Every line cut the past cleanly like a blade. For the first time in decades, I didn't feel scared signing the papers. I felt relief. 2 days later, I left the old suburban house, a place full of sweet memories, but also the place where I had quietly endured far too much. I moved into a luxury penthouse in downtown Portland, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a shimmering city at night, a white kitchen, a large bedroom with thick curtains, a living room facing the Willamette River. For the first time in my life, I lived somewhere not because my husband wanted, my son needed, or it's close to the kids' school, but because I wanted it. I placed my hand on the glass railing as the city wind brushed my hair. I was no longer the woman waiting for Gavin's calls, no longer the mother who forgave the 100th time. It was just me now, and strangely, I was enough. On the 3rd day, I met Sylvie, the therapist Martin recommended. Sylvie was around 50, French-American, with silver-streaked hair and a warm, low voice like a gentle stream. She looked at me not with judgment or pity, but as if she could see right through the armor I had worn for 40 years. "Marjorie," Sylvie said, "you don't have to be strong here. Here, you get to exist." I broke down at her first sentence, crying like someone had turned on a tap inside my chest. I told her I had imprisoned myself in the role of the perfect mother, the devoted wife, the quiet woman. I had never dared to say enough, never set boundaries, never believed I deserved protection. Sylvie listened, then said, "You've been mistaken. Marjorie, your worth isn't measured by how much you give, but by how much you allow yourself to keep. And now it's time you learn that again." When the first session ended, something inside me opened. I walked out no longer the timid woman afraid of conflict or of being disliked. For the first time, I asked myself, why did I ever need permission to be myself? A week later, I changed my appearance. Not to be pretty, not to look younger, but to see the woman I was becoming. I cut my outdated long hair, dyed it a sophisticated light brown. I tossed out the worn cardigans and replaced them with tailored, elegant suits. I wore heels I once believed I didn't deserve. I looked in the mirror, and in that moment, I saw life. Not a life to endure, a life to fight for. Martin helped me organize financial documents, and when I opened old boxes from my late husband, old booklets, labeled envelopes, I found something he left that I never knew about. 3 hidden accounts, 2 long-renewed certificates of deposit, and a long-term stock investment. Total, nearly $550,000. I froze at the number. I had lived frugally, when I didn't need to at all. And the scarier part, Gavin only knew about 1/5 of it. He thought I only had around $300,000, the amount he saw last year when I went to the hospital for tests. He saw that number and thought, my mother is weak, old, alone, the perfect target. He didn't know I was a senior accountant for 25 years, fluent in financial reporting laws, familiar with every bank security loophole. Martin looked at the papers I brought and smirked slightly. "Marjorie, you're smarter than I expected. Gavin has no idea who he's messing with." I answered without pride, only truth. He forgot who his mother is. I'll remind him. That night, in my new penthouse, I sat at the kitchen island with a small notebook. I wrote out each step of my revenge clearly. No shaking hands, no hesitation. Protect assets. Erase every path Gavin could touch. Prepare airtight legal documents. Gather proof of his debts and shady dealings. Record every call. Expose the truth at the exact moment he least expected. I stared at the handwriting. The writing was still mine, but the person writing was someone entirely different, someone I had always feared becoming, someone I should have been years ago. I set the pen down, looking out at the city lights reflected on the glass. Tiny sparks glowed in my eyes like embers waiting to ignite. I whispered, "Gavin, you made your choice. Now it's my turn." I began the new part of my life with deliberate silence. I didn't tell anyone what I was doing or planning. I lived in the penthouse, watching Portland shine every night, like a sleepless city, teaching myself not to unravel when old memories surfaced. But that peace was temporary, because to strike back, I needed the truth. And for the truth, I needed someone who could see through every lie. Martin understood that better than anyone. A few days after I moved, he called me, his voice steady as always. "Marjorie, I have someone I want you to meet, the best I've ever worked with." The next day, I arrived at Martin's office while the sun was still hanging in the sky. The glass windows on the 15th floor reflected a clear springtime Portland. But what we were about to discuss was as dark as the bottom of the Willamette River. "This is Detective Howard," Martin introduced. A man stepped in. He had to be in his 60s. Tall, rugged in the truest sense of the word, sun-darkened skin, deep wrinkles carved around his eyes like traces of 100 nights spent tailing criminals, close-cropped gray hair, eyes sharp as a blade. But what reassured me was the way he looked directly at me. Not with pity, not with judgment, only with the respect owed to a woman climbing out of a pit. "I know your case," he said in a gravelly but steady voice, "and I'll find everything you need. No sugarcoating, no glossing over." I nodded. "I need the truth, no matter how ugly it is." Howard held my gaze for a few seconds, then said, "You'll have it." Just 3 days later, Howard returned with a stack of files so thick it startled me. I sat across from him in Martin's conference room. Overhead, lighting reflected off the dark wooden table, casting a dim glow, like the kind you'd see in an interrogation room. Howard placed the file in front of me. Documents, photos, notes, neatly gathered in a brown folder. "Ms. Marjorie," he began, his voice dropping lower, "I hope you're ready." I wasn't sure if I was, but I nodded anyway. Howard opened the file and flipped the first page. "Gavin owes nearly $70,000 in gambling debt." I leaned back in my chair. That number wasn't just big. It was a pit. Howard continued, as if he knew pausing would only make the shock hit me harder. "And that's just the surface. He borrowed from 3 other sources, a West Coast loan shark outfit and 2 enforcers in the Pearl District. These are photos of him meeting them." He pushed the stack toward me. Gavin stood in a dark parking lot next to a black SUV. 3 tattooed men surrounded him, one handing him an envelope. Gavin's face was tense, his hands shaking. I flipped through more photos. One of him in a dim red-lit bar, talking to a man wearing a thick gold chain. Another of him walking out of a pawn shop. Another of him leaving the house with a large bag. Howard said those were Rebecca's belongings he sold. Every picture felt like a knife. Not because I didn't suspect debt, but because I never imagined his desperation had dragged him into places this dark. "Why?" I whispered. "Why did he let it get this far?" Howard sighed. "Gambling addicts lose their stopping point. When they lose, they borrow to recover. When no one will lend, they sell. When there's nothing left to sell, they take risks. And when the risks fail, they turn to crime." I knew exactly what he was talking about. My chest trembled, but I didn't allow tears to fall. Martin added, "Marjorie, Gavin trying to harm you wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision. His debt and the pressure from dangerous people pushed him." Howard nodded. "Those loan sharks aren't gentle. He has only a few weeks before they deal with him. If he can't pay, they'll come knocking." I closed the file. My hands trembled. "That's why he wanted the inheritance." "Exactly," Howard said. "And he knew you were the only one with enough money to save him." Martin looked at me carefully. "If you don't act, those people will go after Gavin. And when they can't find him, they'll go after anyone connected to him." I lifted my head. "You mean they could come for Rebecca, for the kids?" "It's possible," Martin said, "which is why we need to move fast, quietly, and securely." That evening, I went to the hospital to see Rebecca. The children's room felt warmer now, less of the harsh antiseptic smell, soft golden light falling over the small sleeping faces of the 2 kids. Rebecca sat beside Liam's bed, her eyes exhausted but softening into a faint smile when she saw me. "You're here," she whispered. I sat next to her, and I told her everything. No sugarcoating, no softening, no gentle phrasing to spare her feelings. I told her about the gambling debt, the $70,000, the things he sold, the emptied savings accounts for Liam and Emma, the men in parking lots, the West Coast loan shark crew, The truth that Gavin was no longer hovering on the edge of wrongdoing. He had crossed completely over. Rebecca listened in shock, not interrupting once. When I handed her a copy of the kids' savings account with a balance of $0, she didn't cry immediately. She just stared at the page for a long time, as if each number was draining the breath from her lungs. Finally, she set the paper down, covered her face, and broke down, loud, aching sobs, stripped of pride. I didn't know he'd gone this far. I was so stupid, so blind. I wrapped my arms around her, gentle, forgiving, without blame. "Rebecca, this is not your fault," I said. "You loved your husband. You trusted him. Anyone would have, I understand." Rebecca lifted her tear-streaked face. "But he tried to hurt you, and he hurt the kids. I can't believe it." I cupped her cheek and wiped away a tear. "It's all right now, Rebecca. We're on the same side. For the kids, and for this new life we're building." Rebecca grabbed my hand and held on tight, as though letting go would make her collapse. "Mom Marjorie," she whispered, her voice shaky but clearer than ever. "I'll stand with you, from now on, for Liam, for Emma, and for myself, too." I gave her a tired but genuine smile. "Thank you, Rebecca." In that moment, for the first time, we were no longer mother-in-law and daughter-in-law. We were two women betrayed by the same man, and more importantly, two mothers trying to save their children from the sins of their father. A month passed after the night I walked out of Paula's house, the night I finally saw that Gavin was no longer the child I once knew. That month felt like a year, long, but for the first time, I felt I was truly living. I spent those weeks preparing everything, financial, legal, emotional, personal. I met Sylvie weekly, learning to escape the cycle of self-blame and to see myself without the lens of roles and obligations. I met Martin often, going over documents, revising every detail, planning every next step. Rebecca and I began speaking more. Not polite, strained small talk, but real conversations between two women who had suffered and were trying to rise again. The kids improved with treatment. In the afternoons, I visited the hospital. Rebecca sat beside Emma's bed, and Liam texted me, asking if I'd bring sugar-free pudding. I sat with them, read stories, or simply rested my hand on their legs so they knew I was there. No one mentioned Gavin. No one dared hope he would change. And then, one day, Martin said, "It's time for you to be seen." I looked at him, waiting. If Gavin thinks you're scared or hiding, he'll get careless. We need him to understand you're in control. Showing up at the right moment will shake him. I understood instantly. A wounded animal attacks, but an animal being watched, cornered under a spotlight, panics. "The fundraising gala this week," Martin continued. "He'll be there. I checked the guest list, and I think you should go." I inhaled deeply. I knew the gala he meant, an annual Portland arts event. Long evening gowns, crisp suits, expensive wine, a grand piano, speeches, and polite smiles. I used to attend with my husband years ago. Gavin also showed up sometimes, whenever he needed to polish his image for grants on projects that never materialized. That evening, I opened the wardrobe in my new apartment. The old clothes were gone. I had donated most of them. I picked the black suit I bought last week. Sharp tailoring, clean lines, high collar, fabric soft as silk but structured with strength. I tied my freshly styled hair into a low bun, letting a few strands frame my temples. When I looked in the mirror, I saw a woman who had never before been allowed into the light, strong, calm, defined, no longer begging anyone to accept her. I smiled faintly. "There you are," I said to the reflection. The gala entrance was even grander than I remembered. Golden light poured over marble floors, abstract paintings lined the walls, tables were arranged with elegant displays of food. A string ensemble played slow classical music, each note deliberate. My heels clicked softly on the floor as I entered. No one recognized me, and that was exactly what I wanted. People glanced at me with polite curiosity, perhaps wondering if I was a CEO or the head of some foundation. I let them wonder. For the first time in my life, I wasn't Gavin Wells's mother, the Wells widow, or the frail Mrs. Marjorie who stayed in the background. I was simply myself. I took a sip of red wine, felt the familiar dry finish on my tongue, but tonight, the taste carried a different meaning. I walked slowly around the room, taking in the music and the chatter. No one knew I was looking for someone until I saw him. Gavin stood near the reception table, wearing a freshly pressed coat that couldn't hide how gaunt he had become. His face was tight, eyes sunken, jaw marked by tiny stress sores, signs of sleepless nights. He was trying to talk to an elderly donor with white hair, but the man shook his head, and I watched Gavin swallow hard. I moved toward him, slow, steady. My steps felt light, but to me, each one was a pair of scissors cutting through 40 years of pain. When I got within a few feet, Gavin turned. His eyes widened as if he'd seen a ghost, not because he recognized me, but because he didn't. I stood before him, black suit, new hair, calm face, eyes bright like sparks, sharpened by suffering. He opened his mouth. "Mom?" His voice was so small I almost missed it. I lifted the corner of my lips, not a smile, but absolute control. "Hello, son." Gavin stepped back. I saw both his hands tremble. For a month he believed I'd be afraid, shrinking, hiding, crying, begging. But the woman standing before him was not the one he once dismissed. He stammered, "Mom, you look much better than the day you tried to send me to my grave?" I asked softly, almost whispering. The white-haired donor stared between us in shock and quietly stepped aside. People nearby began to notice, not because I was loud, but because the silence had thickened like fog. Gavin swallowed hard, lips paling. "Mom, what do you want here?" I stepped closer. "I just came to say hello, because tonight I'm not hiding anymore." His eyes darted nervously, like a cornered animal searching for an escape route. I leaned in slightly and repeated the exact line he threw at me that day in the hospital, the line I would never forget. Time to collect. His face drained of color as if someone had pulled the blood straight out of it. Not because I spoke loudly, but because I said it softly. So softly that every word seemed to slide into his ear, leaving him nowhere to run. I turned and walked away, leaving him standing there, trembling under the warm golden lights of the elegant hall. I could almost feel his spine curve, his knees weaken. His fear was so thick it felt tangible in the air. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I knew he was afraid, truly afraid. Not afraid of humiliation, but afraid of being exposed. That night, when I returned to the penthouse, Portland was glowing once more, lights rippling across the surface of the Willamette River like soft ribbons. I stepped onto the balcony, the breeze lifting my hair, and I felt like a different person. Not because of the glamorous gala, not because I made Gavin falter, but because I had taken the single most important step in the journey of a mother pushed to the edge. I was no longer a victim. Around 11 p.m., I opened my laptop on the kitchen counter. The blue light reflected across my face, sharpening the features I had only recently learned to love again. I opened the email Martin had prepared for me. Preliminary complaint. List of evidence. Instructions for filing with the district. Attorney's office. I placed my fingers on the keyboard. No shaking, no hesitation. I selected Submit, File Initial Report. Just one click. A tiny chime sounded, and in that moment, I knew I had stepped into a battle with no way back. No more softness, no more illusions born from motherly love. I whispered steady and quiet, "You made your choice. Now I make mine." When I pressed Submit, sending every legal document to the prosecutor's office, a hollow but liberating feeling washed over me. It wasn't the satisfaction of revenge. It was the sensation of laying down new bricks for my life. For the first time built on my terms, not on duty or a warped sense of motherly obligation. The following week unfolded exactly as Martin and I planned. Yet oddly, even though the plan was mine, every step felt cold as steel. Cold, but necessary. Rebecca was the first person I helped. She arrived at the law office that Monday morning. Gone were the tears of the hospital. In their place, exhaustion, yes, but also a fragile resolve. She handed her kids to the temporary sitter, sat across from me, and said, "Mom, I want a divorce, and I want full custody of Liam and Emma." I placed my hand over hers. "We'll make it happen, and we'll win." We didn't need many words. We understood this wasn't just ending a marriage. It was saving 2 children from a father who had fallen to the bottom of cruelty. Martin and his team drafted the divorce petition, the request for full custody, and the restraining order. All the evidence Howard gathered, the drained savings accounts, the photos with loan sharks, the debt reports, even pictures of Rebecca's belongings being sold, went into the file. "These alone are enough for the court to give Rebecca full custody," Martin said, "and to keep Gavin away from the kids." Rebecca nodded, pain in her eyes, but no wavering. "I'll do anything for my children." I looked at her and felt a deep ache, not because she was weak, but because she had been too strong for too long in a marriage that should never have demanded this of her. Meanwhile, I officially filed attempted murder charges against Gavin. Intentional, premeditated, backed by physical evidence and his own words. I even included the recording from Paula's house where he admitted, "You've lived too long, I need the inheritance." That confession was a blade he had plunged into himself. Martin said, "We don't need him to sign anything. His words already condemned him." I nodded, my chest heavy. I wasn't doing this to get revenge. I was doing this because if I stayed silent, he would hurt someone else. Rebecca, the kids, or even himself. The next step was the house. Gavin had pawned the family home 3 months ago. Rebecca didn't know. When she found out, she nearly collapsed. That house, it's where the kids grew up. Her voice cracked. I made a hard decision, partly from responsibility, partly because I couldn't let the children live in instability created by Gavin's chaos. I paid Gavin's remaining debt, all $38,000, under one condition. Rebecca had to transfer full ownership of the house to herself, removing Gavin entirely, even his signature. Martin agreed. "You're protecting Rebecca and the kids while cutting Gavin off completely." Rebecca cried when I handed her the paperwork. "Mom, you didn't have to." I shook my head. "I'm not doing it for Gavin. I'm doing it for you and the children." She hugged me. A real hug. Not polite, not reluctant. 3 days later, Gavin returned to the house in the suburbs, the one he once called his, the one he mortgaged behind Rebecca's back, the one he treated like property. He turned the doorknob. Locked. He tried the back door. Also locked. He called Rebecca. She didn't answer. He banged on the door, shouted. For the first time, the neighbors didn't stay silent. They called the police. When officers arrived, Rebecca showed the restraining order. The look on Gavin's face as he was forced to leave, fear, bewilderment, anger crushed under helplessness, was indescribable. He stood on the street watching the house sealed shut, watching his wife refuse to look at him, watching neighbors whisper. In that moment, he realized the world he built on manipulation and entitlement had collapsed. And that was only the beginning. 2 weeks later, the media published the first headline, "Portland man suspected of poisoning mother to obtain inheritance." No mention of me, no address, just his name. And then another article, a local news channel, a few blogs. The story spread faster than I expected. Gavin called me. I didn't answer. He texted, "What are you doing?" I stayed silent. One evening, I stumbled on his live stream. He looked hollowed out, eyes wild, hair matted like someone who hadn't slept in days. He told the camera, "It's not true. I never tried to hurt my mom. They're lying about me." But comments flooded in. "You're lying. Police don't investigate nothing. You sold your wife's stuff and blame everyone else? You're terrified of the loan sharks chasing you." The more he spoke, the more he incriminated himself. He ended the stream abruptly when pounding sounded at his motel door. The loan sharks looking for him. After that, he slept in his car, hid in public bathrooms, or crouched behind convenience stores open 24 hours. He was truly unraveling. He lost his job. The company emailed a notice of termination. Severe damage to the organization's public image. Rebecca forwarded me the email. I read it with a strange calm, not joy, not triumph, just calm, as if everything unfolding was simply the universe correcting itself. But what made me calmest wasn't his downfall, nor his debts, nor the cracks in his facade. It was this. For the first time in my life, I understood the value of rising up. For myself, for Rebecca, for Liam and Emma. For all the years I endured his cold words without daring to fight back. Watching him lose control under the weight of his own actions didn't bring me pleasure. It brought me justice. A justice that finally arrived, late, painful, but inevitable. One evening, standing in my penthouse overlooking Portland's bright skyline, I closed my eyes and whispered, "Son, this isn't me destroying you. This is you destroying yourself. I'm simply not holding you up anymore." I thought I was ready for the moment Gavin would be arrested. But when the notification buzzed on my phone, a message from Martin. "They've arrested Gavin. Charges filed." I froze. I was in the kitchen, a gray Portland morning lingering outside the window, mist clinging to the glass. The warmth of my teacup curled around my fingers, but I felt like I drifted out of my own body. No joy, no shock, no anguish, just a vast, quiet stillness. After 40 years, I finally understood what it meant to let go of someone who once called me Mom, not out of hatred, but because the truth left no other path. 3 days later came the first hearing. Gavin was kept in the Multnomah County Jail, awaiting trial for premeditated attempted murder. On top of that were Rebecca's divorce papers, the restraining order, and the debt records loan sharks submitted to protect themselves. I appeared in court wearing my familiar black suit, hair neatly tied back. Rebecca sat beside me, eyes swollen but steady. The children were at school with a sitter. Martin and his team reviewed documents one last time before the session. "Marjorie," Martin said, "we're prepared. Today is only procedural, but understand, this case will be long. The evidence is heavy, and Gavin will fight." I nodded. "I'm ready." In that moment, I knew the truth ahead would hurt, but it was the pain required to heal the rest of my life. The official trial began 2 weeks later. The Multnomah County Courthouse was always crowded, but that morning felt different, heavy. Reporters gathered outside, barred from entering the courtroom but eager for updates. As I stepped inside, it felt like walking into a room where every memory of my life had been summoned. Rebecca sat beside me, her hand trembling until I held it. We took our seats in the front row. Martin stood by us. Across the room, Gavin was brought in. I will never forget that moment. He had lost at least 30 pounds. The orange jumpsuit hung loosely on him. His wrists bore red marks from the cuffs. His hair was a mess, jaw unshaven, eyes sunken from nights without sleep. But what hurt me most was not his appearance. It was his eyes. The same eyes he had the night I left Paula's house. Fearful, furious, desperate, and most devastatingly, unrepentant. He glanced at me, then quickly looked away, as if my presence burned him. I didn't shake. I didn't cry. I looked at him with absolute calm. The prosecutor opened, voice steady and clear. Mrs. Marjorie Wells is the victim of a deliberate attempted homicide. The defendant, Gavin Wells, prepared arsenic and placed it in a box of walnut cookies specifically intended for his mother, with the goal of causing fatality in order to obtain inheritance funds. The courtroom buzzed with whispers. Gavin dropped his head. The prosecutor continued. We have medical reports confirming arsenic in both children, hospital surveillance of the defendant's panic, investigative photos of the defendant meeting loan sharks, and most importantly, a recording of the defendant verbally admitting his intent. The room fell still. Gavin shot up from his seat. That's a setup. My mother tricked me. She framed me. The judge struck the gavel. Defendant, sit down. But Gavin kept yelling. Rebecca planned everything. She wants to take my kids. All of them want to ruin me. Rebecca winced. I placed a hand on her back, steady and calm. For weeks, the trial became the center of local media attention. Reporters weren't allowed inside, but they waited every day by the doors. Each afternoon as we stepped out, dozens of questions rang out. Mrs. Wells, are you afraid your son will seek revenge? Rebecca, do you believe Gavin can change? Do you think Gavin did it for money or because of pressure? I didn't answer. Rebecca didn't either. We stayed silent, the kind of silence needed when you want the truth to speak for itself. During arguments, Gavin's attorney tried to create another story. Gavin didn't intend to harm anyone. He was under debt pressure, mentally unstable. It was just a moment of impulse. But the prosecutor responded with a sentence that made the courtroom stop breathing. Debt doesn't make someone put arsenic in their own mother's food. The jury stayed quiet. Gavin bowed his head, but when the prosecutor played the recording, he snapped up, eyes wide. She was supposed to eat it, not the kids. You've lived too long. I need the inheritance money. Gavin screamed. I didn't say that. That's not my voice. But everyone in the courtroom knew he said it, and he wasn't sorry. In the end, the jury needed only 2 hours to decide. They returned to the courtroom, faces solemn. The judge asked, Have you reached a verdict? The jury foreman stood up. Your Honor, we find the defendant, Gavin Wells, guilty of premeditated attempted homicide. No one said anything. No one breathed loudly. No one moved. Gavin collapsed into his chair, hands shaking violently. No, Mom, how could you do this to me? The judge announced, 14 years in prison, with no parole for the first 6. The sound of the gavel hit like a blade severing the rest of his life. Rebecca burst into tears, covering her face. I turned and held her, and she fell into my shoulder like a child desperate for shelter. Not because we were happy, not because we won, but because everything was finally over. Or at least, the worst part of it. When the officers walked Gavin past us, he looked at me, not with hatred, but with disbelief. "I'm your blood," he whispered. "Why would you do this to me?" I answered softly like a breath. "I didn't do this to you. You did this to me. I simply stopped protecting you." Gavin was taken away, feet dragging, head down. That image I will never forget for as long as I live. But I didn't shake. I didn't collapse. I didn't feel the old kind of pain. All I felt was emptiness. A distant, peaceful kind of emptiness, like the air after a storm finally passes. Outside the courthouse, Portland was drizzled with light rain. Rebecca wrapped her arms around me. "Mom, because of you, my kids and I are safe." I squeezed her shoulder lightly. "Not because of me. Because you were brave enough to leave first." The children ran to her legs, then to me. Liam stood on tiptoe to wrap his arms around my waist, and Emma rested her head against my hip. I held all three of them close. In that moment, I understood. I had lost Gavin. A part of my heart would always mourn that. But mourning doesn't mean going back. And I also understood. I had saved another family. Rebecca, Liam, Emma. And saved myself from decades of darkness. That evening, I returned to the penthouse. Streetlights spilled across the Willamette River, glowing like gold ribbons on the water. I stood by the glass wall, closed my eyes, and let my breath settle slowly. I didn't feel victory. I didn't feel joy, only relief, the kind only survivors of storms truly understand. I was no longer the woman others could manipulate, no longer the mother trying to patch cracks that couldn't be saved, no longer the faint shadow in someone else's life. I whispered, "At last, I'm free." After the trial, after the final strike of the gavel, I walked out of the courthouse as if stepping out of a dark room I had been trapped in for half a lifetime. The early winter Portland air was cold, but my heart was strangely calm. No more fear of Gavin showing up at my door. No more hearing his footsteps pacing at night. No more enduring harsh words or cold stares that crush my spirit. I was free. A freedom not given by anyone, but reclaimed by me. But that freedom wasn't only for me, it was for women like me. Women who had lived too long inside invisible walls of sacrifice, guilt, and endurance. So I decided to do something I never thought I would be strong enough to do. I created a foundation. It started as a small idea, flickering in my mind for weeks after Gavin's sentencing. One evening, while pouring tea in my kitchen overlooking the city, I remembered my sessions with Sylvie and the stories she told. Older women enduring emotional abuse, exploitation, disrespect, stripped of control over their own lives. It was heartbreaking. I was not an exception, only one of thousands silenced. I picked up my phone and called Martin. "Martin," I said, "I want to start a support foundation for older women facing domestic abuse. I want them to have a place to go, a voice, someone who believes them." Martin went silent for a few seconds, then said, with a warmth I rarely heard from him, "Marjorie, I think that's the best thing you could ever do." We began working. I used part of the $550,000 my late husband left me, the amount I found early in my journey, as seed funding. I chose the name Second Dawn Foundation. The name made my heart tremble for the first time in months, because this wasn't only my second dawn, it was for the women still waiting for theirs. Rebecca was the first person I told. She stayed quiet for a long time after hearing it. "You want to help women who went through what you did?" "I want to help women who went through what we did," I said, placing my hand over hers. Rebecca burst into tears, but not the painful kind. This time it was gratitude, recognition of her own worth, and the relief of stepping out of the dark. "Mom," she said through tears, "I want to go back to school. I want to study psychology. I want to help women like us." I squeezed her hand. "Do it, Rebecca. I believe in you." And she did. She enrolled in a community psychology program at Portland State University. She studied in the mornings, cared for the kids in the afternoons, and volunteered at the foundation in the evenings. She poured her heart into every call from older women seeking help. For the first time, I saw her shine. Liam and Emma became two tiny suns warming my heart again. Every weekend they came to my apartment. Liam knocked with 3 familiar taps. Emma ran in and hugged my legs as if I were the safest place on earth. "Grandma, do you have pudding?" "Grandma, I brought my new drawing." Among the potted plants on my balcony, with children's laughter filling the air, I learned the meaning of family again. Not a family by blood, not a family by paper, a family that chooses each other. Rebecca often sat beside me on the sofa as we watched the kids play. "You know," she said one afternoon, sunlight washing over her face, "I used to think you were just quiet and gentle. I never realized you were this strong." I looked at her. "Not strong, Rebecca. I just didn't want to be hurt anymore." As the foundation gained official approval, media attention grew. First a small magazine interview, then a local TV segment, then a national show. I never revealed every detail of the case. I kept the most painful parts private, but I shared enough for some 60 or 70-year-old woman sitting alone in a living room to think, if she could do it, maybe I can too. And they came. They wrote letters. They called. They lined up outside halls where I spoke. During seminars, I stood on stage and looked at rows of elderly women, some with silver hair, some in old cardigans, some clutching small handbags like holding their trembling youth. Many cried as they listened. One elderly woman took my hand afterward. "Mrs. Wells, I thought I was the only one whose child treated me badly. Turns out we have each other." I hugged her, my heart softening. In their eyes I saw myself years ago, fragile, enduring until I had nothing left. And silently I thanked God, thanked fate for leading me out of that place. I also relearned how to love myself, not through makeup or expensive clothes, but by caring for my mental health, protecting boundaries, and placing myself first. I learned how to use money to protect me, not to please others. I bought a new balcony chair because I liked it, not because Gavin once called the old one outdated. I ate dinner at the restaurant I liked. I took small trips, alone, for the first time in decades. The comfortable life I live now isn't to show off. It's a reminder that I spent a lifetime enduring. And now I deserve better. No one controls me anymore. No one spends my money. No one uses age, weakness, or harsh words to crush my worth. I look in the mirror each night and smile gently. I'm back, and I'm stronger than ever. One afternoon, while Rebecca was at school and the kids were in class, I sat on the balcony watching the sunset. The last light stretched across the Willamette River like a golden silk ribbon. I closed my eyes and breathed. "I'm grateful," I whispered, "grateful for this second chance." But I knew My story wasn't finished. Not because there were battles left, not because revenge wasn't complete, but because life doesn't end with a neat period. It opens new doors. And at 70, I was stepping into the widest one yet. A door leading to healing, to freedom, to the woman I was always meant to be. 3 years passed since Gavin's sentencing. It sounds long, but to me it felt like a gentle breath the universe finally returned to me. My life settled. The foundation grew. Rebecca was close to graduating. My grandchildren thrived. And I became the version of myself I never thought I'd meet again. But that peace was stirred by a pale yellow envelope the mail carrier placed carefully in my hand on a rainy Portland afternoon. The top corner showed the prison's return address, sender, Gavin Wells. I stood frozen for a long moment before opening it. Not because I was afraid of him, but because I was afraid I might feel something I no longer wanted to feel. Afraid of pity, afraid of softening, afraid that 40 years of being a mother would try to slip back through the cracks I had worked so hard to close. I tore the envelope slowly, as if each rip of paper was a piece of the past that needed to be opened one last time. Inside, Gavin wrote neatly, a handwriting I had forgotten he once had. He began with an apology. The words sounded sincere, but beneath them I sensed something hazy. Mom, I know everything was my fault, but you also have to understand my situation. The moment I read the word but, I exhaled. Just one word, and I could already hear Gavin's voice from 3 years ago. Smooth, cold, always twisting the truth, so he never had to take full responsibility. Then he wrote, I'm begging you to visit me. Just once. So I know you haven't really abandoned me. Abandoned? I let out a laugh, not the kind born of amusement, but a long exhale pulling decades of exhaustion out of my chest. Abandoned? Who abandoned whom? He abandoned his children when he ran from loan sharks. He abandoned Rebecca when the truth broke her. He abandoned me, the woman who raised him since he was 2, by trying to kill me with poisoned chocolate cakes. If anyone had been abandoned, I thought it was me. For 40 years. I folded the letter but didn't throw it away. I took it to my therapist, Sylvie, that same afternoon. Sylvie had been with me since the days after the first hearing, when my mind was still tangled between being a mother and being a victim, between duty and damage. She looked at me with calm eyes, neither judging nor rushing. I handed her the letter. Sylvie read it slowly. Then she set it on the table, so gently the paper made no sound. How did you feel reading it? She asked. I leaned back in the chair, looking out the window at the Portland rain falling in thin threads. I felt empty, I said. Not angry, not pity, just empty. Sylvie nodded. And what makes you hesitate about visiting him? I stayed silent for a long time. Because I'm afraid. If I don't go, I'm a bad mother. My voice was so small it nearly dissolved into the rain. Sylvie tilted her head, studying me. Marjorie, she said gently but firmly, I want to ask you something. What makes you want to see someone who once tried to kill you? The question pierced the softest part of my heart. I met her eyes. Maybe. Because for 40 years, I believe mothers had to forgive, had to stay, had to endure, I whispered. Sylvie nodded slowly. But you're no longer the woman from those 40 years. You're the woman who rebuilt herself after loss, the woman who saved herself. You don't owe Gavin a single visit. My chest felt lighter, as if someone had finally lifted the invisible weight I'd carried since I was 20. I think, I told Sylvie, Gavin wants me to return to the weak mother I once was, the one who overlooked every mistake, the one who lifted him every time he fell, even when he was the one pushing me over the edge. Exactly, Sylvie said. He wants you back inside the mold you shattered, and you have the right to refuse. I drew a long breath. Maybe I already knew the answer before I came here. That evening I sat at my desk. The lamp cast a warm glow, the curtains softened the shadows, and outside, the rain tapped steadily. I opened a blank sheet of paper and picked up my pen. I wrote his name first, Gavin Wells, without shaking, without anger. Then I wrote my final letter to him. Gavin, I received your letter. I hope what you wrote was sincere, and that in these past years you've had time to see the consequences of your actions. But I need to tell you this. I cannot come to the prison to see you, not because I hold resentment, but because I am no longer the lifeline you reach for every time you drown in your own choices. I paused, closing my eyes. Something deep inside me felt undone, like the last knot of a rope that had been tied around my heart for decades. I continued. I've learned that people only truly change when they run out of people to blame. And I refuse to be the person you blame even one more time. I hope you find the remorse you mentioned. I hope you learn to take responsibility like an adult. But my path no longer runs beside yours. I sign this, Marjorie Wells. Not Mom. No longer Mom. I was no longer the title he had trampled so easily. I folded the letter, placed it in an envelope, and sealed it. When I dropped it into the outgoing mailbox, I felt as if I had set down a part of my life that had been heavy for far too long. Strangely, I didn't cry. I didn't tremble. I didn't regret. I just felt light. Lighter than I'd ever felt. The next day, as I walked to the foundation office, Portland was bright in a rare way. Sunlight glinted off rain-soaked branches, and the Willamette shimmered like liquid glass. I stood by the riverbank, hands in my coat pockets, my hair lifting gently in the wind. I'm truly free, I whispered. Not just free of Gavin, not just free of 40 years of darkness, but free of the worn-out, self-sacrificing version of myself, free from the pressure of being the proper mother, free from emotional debts, free from the illusion that enough love could change someone. I was free to live, to love, to build, to heal. I thought of the women who came to the foundation. I thought of the elderly women who hugged me and cried. I thought of Rebecca and my grandchildren. I thought of every life I had touched, and those I would touch in the future, and I smiled. I knew my journey had closed the old chapter, but new doors ahead were wide open. And me? I stepped into that light as someone entirely new. For the first time in 70 years, I was unafraid. Years passed since I mailed my final letter to Gavin. My new life flowed gently, like cool water over stones once rough. Every morning in my sunlit penthouse, I felt grateful that I chose to stand up, to save myself at a moment when it felt too late. But it turned out it's never too late for an older woman to start again. Second Dawn Foundation grew faster than I ever imagined. From a tiny office with 2 desks and a few worn chairs, we now had a full support center where older women could come, talk, receive legal guidance, and, most importantly, be heard without judgment. Hundreds of women came through those doors, some with snow-white hair, walking slowly, some trembling because it was the first time they dared speak aloud secrets they'd buried for decades. Some came just for a hug, a word of comfort, a reminder they weren't invisible. I saw myself in each of them. a woman who once believed sacrifice was duty, endurance was virtue, and family bonds had to be preserved no matter how twisted. Now they stood up, reclaiming their lives. Witnessing that warmed my heart every time. Rebecca, my daughter-in-law, became our lead counselor. She appeared in newspapers, on television, at statewide conferences. When people asked why she chose this path, she always answered, "Because my mother-in-law saved my family with the strength she spent a lifetime searching for." Every time I heard that, my throat tightened. Not from sadness, but from a recognition I had never known. Rebecca had changed so much that it was hard to remember she was once cold toward me. Now she lifted other women the way I once lifted her. Liam and Emma grew stronger than I expected. They became the two small lights brightening my later years. Liam matured into a boy who loved helping others, while Emma proudly told friends I was the hero of the family. I laughed every time. A hero? I was only a grandmother who lived longer than her own pain, but to them, I was proof a family can be reborn after ruin. One year, I received an award honoring contributions to the senior community of Oregon. I wore a cream suit, James's pearl necklace, and stepped onto the stage in long applause. Holding the small trophy, I felt I was holding my entire journey. From the dark kitchen where I was treated like a burden, to the lit stage where I stood as a woman of strength and worth. One autumn night, Portland was chilly. I sat on my balcony with a soft wool scarf around my neck, watching the city light up like scattered stars. The wind carried the scent of rain and dry maple leaves. I closed my eyes, letting time pass over me like a slow-moving film. I remembered the day Gavin stood in the hospital and said that sentence I'll never forget. I remembered the night I pulled my keys from Paula's door, my heart hollow. I remembered signing the complaint against my own son, remembered the trial, Rebecca's tears on my shoulder, remembered the prison letter the moment I signed Marjorie instead of Mom. I had endured everything a lifetime could hold, and I survived. Not just survived. I bloomed from the ashes life left behind. I opened my eyes to the dancing lights below, and I realized something simple, yet it took a lifetime to understand. The one who tried to kill me inadvertently helped me be reborn. If Gavin hadn't pushed me to the edge of death, I might never have been born again, never known my strength, never lived such a beautiful life in my final years. My story didn't end in tragedy. It ended in power, a power I paid dearly for, but never regretted. I knew my story wasn't just mine. Every day I retold it, in halls, on TV, or through handwritten letters to elderly women trying to step out of the dark. I knew someone out there saw themselves in my words. I couldn't save everyone. But if I could save even one person, then every pain I endured had meaning. Night settled. The city grew quiet as if someone had placed a hand over its heart. A deep peace spread through my body like I was being gently held by the life I fought to reclaim. I leaned back and whispered, "At last, I am completely free. Free from fear, free from shame, free from the roles society forced onto mothers, and free to live the final chapter of my life as a woman it took me decades to find again." I smiled, closed my eyes, and let my breath melt into the cool night air. And I knew, from this moment on, the past can no longer bind me. My life had closed every shadow and opened a dawn no one could take away. Thank you for staying with me until the end of my story. If you're still here and this journey touched your heart, I would truly love to know where you're watching from. Please tell me in the comments. Even a small message lets me know we're still walking together. And if you want to hear more stories of strength, family, and rebirth in our later years. Please like, comment, and subscribe. From the bottom of my heart, thank you for sharing your time with me today.